But
that's actually that's
yeah.
fairly similar. That's very similar to David Boonan's view. It's something like that.
Okay.
His is a little. It's a little bit. His view is a little bit more nuanced. I know.
Jake Thompson has a question.
Yeah. But wait, before Jacob, what's with this camera thing that I see right by, and James? What's up with that camera?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Okay, Jacob. I mean, Jake, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask this question of the group to sort of gauge your positions, assuming that you have a position.
I can barely hear you. Can you turn your mic up?
I heard that.
I barely can't hear you.
All right, let me see what I can do.
Yeah, your volume's very low.
It's probably because you're outside.
No, it's not that.
Well, because I could hear Jake fine, so.
Okay.
The little camera thing means that you're capturing video. Or I think it does.
Okay, how's this?
Okay, much better. Much better.
All right. So here's my argument, or not an argument. It's a question. I'm not trying to make an argument right now.
Okay.
But this is a poll. I want to ask you if a day comes where an artificial womb becomes cheap and readily available, something that a large majority of people could afford at reasonable expense. If it were the case that any woman could end a pregnancy without ending the life of the fetus, would abortion as we know it be morally permissible?
I actually posed that question in the Hangout a while ago because Christopher Kazor, however you pronounce his last name, wrote an article about that. The article was called "Could Artificial Wombs End the Abortion Debate?" Yeah, that's very interesting here. Well, let's ask either James or Lance, if any of you two want to answer this. I'd be interested to hear that.
Oh, so like I would think that early on abortion's permissible anyway, but a late-term abortion.
No. The question is artificial wombs. Like supposing we developed artificial wombs where we could say from conception we could safely remove the embryo or fetus and put it in an artificial womb where it would grow like normal. It'd basically be like an incubator, except the viability would extend all the way back to conception. So if this was readily affordable and we could easily do this, would you still support abortion? In other words, killing the child?
I wouldn't be very strongly against it, because still I just wouldn't think that you're killing a person. But, sure, yeah, you could save it. There is one problem, though, because just incubating the fetus isn't enough, or the embryo, right? Like, if your children need to be put into a house where they, I don't know, are loved and stuff, and so if you're just incubating a whole bunch of little babies and then giving birth to them and then kicking them out onto the street, I don't know, that wouldn't really solve the problem a whole lot. But I guess if you could find people to take them in, then sure, go for it. I wouldn't think it unwise, though.
Well, I guess let me make it more nuanced. Suppose do you think the woman would still have the right to insist on the death of the fetus, assuming we had artificial wombs? Like, would the woman have the right to do that still? I suppose that's the real question here.
Oh, I don't know. Not at all, no. And I don't think the woman really has the right to insist on... Or actually, yeah, okay, I guess she does. But no, yeah, I would say no, then. She wouldn't have much of a choice in the matter. I would be fine with saying, yeah, just incubate it, even if the mother doesn't like it.
All right. James, what do you think?
I think there are three factors to this particular question that are relevant. One, the ontological status of a fetus. Two, without getting too much into what my particular views are justifying abortion, the non-distinction between minds and bodies of principal entities, that is the mother, and then third would be constitutional rights vis-a-vis the 14th Amendment. I think that taking all of these things into consideration, this particular question would nullify maybe the non-distinction between minds and bodies of primary entities, but not the other two. So I think to unpack, I think that abortion would still be permissible in regards to 14th Amendment, the right to privacy, and also the ontological status of the fetus.
Okay, so you mean terminative abortion would still be permissible? The idea of actually killing the child would still be permissible? Okay. All right, well, Lisa, what do you think? We're talking about the artificial womb question here.
Well, we already had a discussion about this, what, like a month or two ago? Should I take my retainer out so I don't sound all slurry?
That's fine.
And I think what I said to you was terminative abortion is the only kind of abortion that actually exists. So I prefer to talk about things that actually
that's
exist.
why this is sort of a what if question. Like, what if we actually did develop artificial womb that we could remove?
I have a question.
And I came in a little bit late, so I'm making some assumptions based on conversations that we've had previously. So you might want to clarify for me what the actual question is, just so I make sure I'm addressing what you're really talking about instead of just deciding what I'm going to say.
Well, okay, here's the thing. So prior to viability, right, which is around, what was it, like 20 weeks or later, something like that here. Prior to that, we can't really remove a fetus from a woman without killing the fetus. But if artificial wombs were around and were affordable, and we could, basically viability would extend back to conception. So at any point in the pregnancy, let's suppose we could remove safely the embryo fetus and put it in an artificial womb. Now, if we could do that, would the woman still have the right to insist on the death of the child at this point, even though we could remove the child without killing it? That's my question.
Well, I think you make a lot of assumptions by saying, can she insist on the death? I think that if you were able to make an artificial womb, there would be people that would want to use that. For instance, people who can't carry a baby to full term themselves. I mean, there might be uses for that. But as an alternative to abortion, I don't see how an artificial womb is a practical solution to that. It seems like it creates more problems. And I'm uncomfortable with the assertion that somehow if an artificial womb is available, that suddenly makes abortion something that's a moot point. It's not a moot point. There's still reasons why a woman would choose to terminate a pregnancy. And I don't think that there's a lot of women that would go, oh, well, I was going to terminate my pregnancy for a host of reasons, but now that there's an artificial womb, I'm not going to make that choice. It's just not something that I see as a practical matter. And then adding in that judgment that now you're causing the death by not using, I think that that's really stretching.
Okay, so you think that even with artificial wombs, if a woman wants the child inside of, or the fetus, or call it whatever you want, inside dead, you think she would still have the right to do that, even if we had artificial wombs?
Yes, I think that abortion is legal. It's the law of the land right now that women are allowed to have abortions. I don't think that if you create an artificial womb, we can suddenly tell women that they don't have those rights anymore. No, I don't think so.
Would this be based on your no? Because James's answer was, he said, well, because he thinks that it's not a person, so it has no rights, and therefore if the woman wants it dead, we can kill the fetus. Is that kind of the reason why you're saying the artificial wombs wouldn't make a difference here?
I'm saying the artificial wombs wouldn't make a difference because a woman still has a right to terminate a pregnancy at will.
Okay.
Wait, well, why does she have that right? I mean, it seems that if we're going to grant that the
Roe
fetus
v.
is in fact a
Wade, she
person,
has that right.
sorry. Well, if we're going to grant that the fetus is a person, the reason why a woman might want to not carry out the pregnancy is because it's harmful for her body. It's going to hold her back in life or something like that. But if those reasons are no longer standing, if you can just chuck the fetus off into an artificial womb and never have to think about it again, it seems those reasons don't stand anymore. I don't know. I think Cody's thought experiment is pretty good here.
Well, interestingly, I think it would. It would certainly nullify the Good Samaritan violinist argument, or at least that particular justification for it. And I see that. Let's see, Jacob. Why don't you say something? You want to say
I had
something?
a question. I have a question. If we grant, for the sake of argument, that a fetus is a person, how would the 14th Amendment apply? That's what I was wondering.
If we grant that it's a person?
Yeah, just for the sake of argument. Let's just
Okay,
grant
well, then, yeah, it seems then it would be, it would fall under the 14th Amendment then, because it's a person, and so it would be entitled to the protections of our government.
Right, and that's what I was thinking of, because, like, if we went with the argument that, okay, the woman has the right to choose, the woman has the right to carry out abortion, etc. Okay, if we grant that for sake of argument, and the 14th Amendment does apply to that, but if the fetus is a person, how would the 14th Amendment suddenly apply to that? Would that nullify the woman's right to have that abortion because of that fact?
Because it's a person? Yeah, I would say.
Just to clarify, the 14th Amendment is the right to privacy, right? The freedom from illegal search and seizure, right? Under which Roe v. Wade is deemed legal. The protection of life is not within the 14th Amendment.
No, the 14th Amendment says that all citizens born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the rights, privileges thereof, or something like that. So it is talking about rights and whatnot. So
okay.
I didn't have my verbiage entirely accurate. Thank you for clarifying.
That's fine. That's fine. But it's like I was like trying to understand better, like
because
I was just trying to understand better the idea of how would it apply if the fetus, hypothetically speaking, we're granting it for the sake of argument that the fetus itself is a person. Like I want to better understand how it would apply.
Well, okay. How would that apply? Well, because if it's a person, then because the 14th Amendment talks about persons being, afforded rights and everything, though. So, I mean, in fact, in the Roe v. Wade decision here, the reason they were able to legalize abortion was because Justice Blackmun tried to argue that the unborn does not count as a person under the 14th Amendment. I mean, that they recognized that if the unborn was a person under the 14th Amendment, then they couldn't justify legalizing abortion because they recognized that it would. If you grant it's a person and it applies to the 14th Amendment, that means you can't have a woman kill it in the name of privacy. So, James.
Okay.
I just wanted to quickly clarify that earlier when I was answering the question and I said 14th Amendment, what I actually meant was 4th Amendment.
Oh, okay.
Just had a power of 10 off. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I was trying to get that clarified too. Just like
No, yeah, that was I completely misspoke.
It looks like Jake posted the 14th Amendment on the comments here.
Correcting me.
Yeah, Jake posted the 14th Amendment here in the comment. Yeah, it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And well, you can read it on the side if you want to. So,
wait, can I just ask? So, are we talking about whether abortion is morally permissible or if it's permissible by law? Because it kind of seems irrelevant to me what the 14th Amendment says, especially as a Canadian.
Well, I think in order to answer the legal question, you really have to answer the ethical question first. Like, I really don't think you can answer the legal question without first answering the ethical question. So, because I mean, first of all, I mean, if a lot of the pro-choicers are right that it's not a person, not subject to rights, then I see no reason why abortion shouldn't be legal. illegal, assuming that's the case. So I think you got to answer the ethical question first. Okay, so now how about what?
Can I just answer the question that was being asked real quick that Jake had presented?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Rodell, I just want to say, as far as I'm concerned, until the fetus achieves personhood, which I believe is around 6 months, maybe a few weeks after that, I don't think that it has a right to life. And as far as whether or not yes, I am smart mouth pundit. As far as I'm concerned regarding the issue of if we had a incubator for fetuses, I don't think it would in any way, shape, or form affect the woman's right to choose up until those 6 months, because in my opinion, the woman effectively has property rights to the fetus up until it achieves personhood. So it would be completely up to her. I think for practical purposes, she should have property rights to the fetus until it achieves personhood. So no, I don't think the existence of an incubator is any way relevant to the woman's right to choose.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry. Can I ask a question to Rodell? So you since you would argue that a fetus is not a person, if let's say hypothetically speaking, if a fetus was a person, would you still argue that the woman still has property rights over the fetus?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
I do think, though, I will add an exception. I do not think a woman is obligated to carry a fetus if it's treated as a person to term, if her life is in danger, or if she has significant health complications, if she would likely suffer from significant health complications.
Okay, so that would be like the principle of double effect then. So I would be fine with that.
So now I'd kind of like to go through each of the pro-choicers here one by one and have all you guys who are pro-choice or think that the fetus is not a person, to sort of explain your view a little bit, sort of explain what you think a person is and at what point along the developmental line the fetus acquires this and why you think that's a good reason. So let's see, who should we start with here? Why don't we start with let's start with Lisa here. I'm curious to hear this.
I knew you were going to start with me.
So Lisa, why is you don't think a fetus is a person? Why is that? And at what point does it become a person?
I think it becomes a person when it's born. If somebody can mute their mic, that would be helpful because it's really hard to talk through the echo.
Yeah, Rodel. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Can you mute your mic?
Sorry, I'm having trouble because this laptop is old. I'm having trouble muting it.
It should be in the top right corner of your.
I know where it's at. When I hit it, it doesn't always respond. Sorry about that.
All right, that's cool. Just anyway, continue, Lisa.
Thank you. Okay, I think it becomes a person when it's born, and I think that there are issues of autonomy, and I think while the fetus is in utero, that autonomy belongs to the woman, and then after the child is born, then there's a shared autonomy.
Okay.
Like, not a shared autonomy. That didn't make any sense. Sorry.
It's fine.
People are like, what? The woman has autonomy and the baby has autonomy. Prior to that, the fetus is part of the woman's body, so the only autonomy is the woman's autonomy until the child is born. Then the child has autonomy and becomes a person. I think that's...
Okay, so just so we're clear, when you say born, you mean like when it's no longer inside, once it's out of the woman, no longer in her body, it's a person then. Is that right?
Now, see, I can see where you're going here, because then you're talking about the artificial womb, right?
No,
but
I'm
I,
not.
again...
Oh, no.
Okay,
I wasn't going to
again,
I think he's referring to the moment when the baby pops out of the woman's body.
What's that?
Like before, I think he's referring to that moment, before that moment that the baby pops out of the woman's body. So like right before the woman's about to give birth.
Yeah.
He's referring to that moment. Is that baby that before, like, let's say for example, the woman's about to give birth, like 2 days later, 2 days prior to that birth, was that baby a person? in the womb. I think that's where he's going with that.
Maybe that's what he's going for, but I think that for all practical purposes, you become a person when you're born.
Okay,
Not when
so
you're
all right. Okay, so then what do you think of, what about partial birth abortion exactly, which is where part of the baby's head is still inside the woman and the other part is outside? Is that permissible?
Usually when you have partial birth abortion, it's because of some sort of anomaly with the child. For instance, a friend of mine who had a pregnancy that was terminated at 18 weeks because the child had trisomy 18 and much of its brain was missing. And so in that case, I think the partial birth abortion has more to do with the size. But I don't know a lot about partial birth abortion. But I think those circumstances are usually based on some medical issues, correct?
Well, I'm not asking about the circumstance. I'm just saying, well, let's say we just did this on a healthy fetus, right? I'm asking this because you said that birth was when it becomes a person, which...
Why would you do a partial birth abortion on a healthy fetus?
Well, we do the same reason.
Ridiculous.
Well, they do. Well, is it any more ridiculous than doing regular abortions on a healthy fetus?
I think so. I mean, abortion happens within the first 13 weeks.
Typically.
So yeah, after that point, I think that you run into some more ethical issues at that point. So
you said it wasn't a person prior to birth, though. So that's why I'm trying.
I don't think the ethical issues are because of whether or not it's a person or not.
Okay, well then, so that's why I'm kind of trying to pinpoint the person thing here. So is a baby that's partway out, like about to be, have a partial birth abortion done, is that baby a person? With its head is still inside, but the rest of its body is not. Is that baby a person? Did everybody hear that, or?
I heard that. Could I ask for some clarification quickly? Because when I talk about personhood, I mean that defining factor, that makes something morally culpable or makes it morally worthy or have moral value. I just don't know what Lisa could mean by person if she, means something other than this part of us that is responsible for us having rights, Maybe Lisa should just explain
that. I mean, there are any number of ways that you can be.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that, after your head is still inside and your body's out, and that doesn't make any sense to me. You weren't born.
Okay, so you're fully out to be a person?
But someone who has had their body removed and the head is still there is not born. It's not a person. They weren't born. That's a partial birth abortion. It's a termination. They're not born.
I guess the problem that I'm seeing is I'm just not seeing how location is supposed to be relevant here. I mean, common example.
The reason
I'm trying to be consistent.
If I may.
Sorry, James.
The reason that it seems to you that location is not relevant here is because Lisa said something very important that I think that you missed, and she said that the issues are not a matter of personhood, but of birth, right? So at the moment of delivery, one is imbued with the legal status of a person. What it means in any sort of metaphysical sense that you guys might want to talk about it is not a factor in her reasoning of this question.
Okay, then I guess. Okay, well, I guess I was sort of I was asking the metaphysical part of it, like what constitutes a person.
We could maybe cut talk of personhood out, like just what constitutes, what are sufficient conditions for something having a moral right? I think it's just obvious that birth is not that. There's no moral difference between something 10 seconds before it's born and something 10 seconds after.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Hey, just real quick, I see Tim Sayo. I don't know how to pronounce that name here. Hello.
It seems to me that these questions of like, what about 5 minutes before it's born? What about when its ankle's out, but maybe its knee hasn't come out yet? I mean, we could make this incredibly absurd. We could say, well, what about, okay, maybe if it hasn't taken its first breath, but what if its lungs are contracting in preparation for taking its first breath? Like, these are asinine subdivisions of time that really are so blatantly irrelevant to the discussion that it seems to someone like me absurd.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's why I'm a little baffled by the birth criterion. But
well, what is okay?
I don't. The birth criteria isn't baffling. Either you're inside of the uterus or you're outside of the uterus. What I mean, if you're still in the uterus, you're still in the uterus, right? If you're freed from the birth canal, you're born. I don't see how that's like this really fuzzy area.
Okay, it's baffling to me, I guess, because I just don't see. I just don't get the location criteria.
Okay, what is the criteria then? It's like, how do we constitute that?
Well, right now I'm just going through the various pro-choicers to give their answer to this. But how about
again, I'm not quote unquote pro-choicer.
I know. So let's go to James here.
Okay, wait, no. Before we go to me, can we at least agree that the question of timing of birth is an absurd question? I mean, if we're going to address personhood, then that's something that we can really get to hair splitting about.
Okay, fine.
Okay, fair enough.
Wow, is it really that funny, James?
No. I mean, it kind of is. Like, imagine you're in a vehicle going through a tunnel, and we're having the same sort of absurd conversation about at what point you leave the tunnel. You leave the tunnel when you're no longer in the tunnel. You're born at the moment you're freed from the birth canal. Like, I don't see how that's at all a strange concept.
Definition is circular.
I mean, I guess the point here we're trying to say is if you're going to say birth is when abortion is okay, then it seems appropriate to bring up this partial birth abortion question here, where it's like, well, okay, is that permissible? Okay, so you might say, well, no, because it's still born because a part of it is inside the uterus or the body, but then what about the other parts? Those aren't inside. That's kind of why I brought that up. So.
Noted. And if I'm not mistaken, though, partial birth abortion is actually outlawed in all 50 states. Yes?
I think so. I'm pretty sure. I hope so.
We don't check that, just to be sure.
Anyway, James, let's hear your view of personhood. Why is the fetus not a person, and around what point does it become a person?
Actually, my views on abortion have less to do with personhood and more to do with the artificial division between the mind and the body of the mother.
Can you explain that a little bit?
So I see no legitimate distinction between the body of a mother and the mind, the quote mind of a mother, and so when we look at something like the termination of pregnancy, there are huge numbers of pregnancies that are terminated entirely against the will of the mother, right? I mean, anytime there's a miscarriage, presumably, if the mother is aware she's pregnant, she probably wants to have the baby, right? But the pregnancy will spontaneously abort for any number of reasons, and they can be things as seemingly trivial as not getting enough sleep, right? Where in all practical contexts we would say, you didn't sleep well, that's no reason to have an abortion, right? The body will do that. The body will terminate an abortion if the mother is under any significant amount of stress, or even insignificant amount of stress, right? It could be anything. Any reason can cause a spontaneous abortion. I simply refuse to see a distinction between the body making such a decision and the mother making such a decision. And I think that saying that a mother, I think the body does make choices. I just don't. I think that we would we hesitate to call them choices. But my body does any number of things that could possibly be otherwise without consenting me, right? Our bodies function all the time, right? So when we talk to a mother and she says, well, you know, I think I'm too young to have a baby, or I don't have the financial means to care for another human being, and we say that those are trivial. I think that that's an absurd judgment for us to make when her biological machine will make that choice for her for seemingly or even more trivial reasons. So because I see no separation between what a body does and what a mind does, it seems to me that an abortion is justified for nearly any reason that a mother might choose.
Okay. So what's the difference between, say, a woman deciding to go to an abortion clinic and say, I want to terminate the fetus, versus that same woman having a miscarriage against her wanting of that? What's the difference?
Apart from her conscious participation in wanting to have a birth and the necessary participation to go to an abortion clinic, I would say that there's no distinction.
I think Tim.
I have to disagree with that.
Tim Asso here says.
I mean, you're welcome to disagree with that, but.
Yeah, wait. See, I don't see that though. Surely there's a difference. I mean, in ethics, we make this distinction all the time between intentionally causing something and something happening non-intentionally or via something else, right? I mean, because in the case of spontaneous miscarriage, it's not like the woman is actively, you know, choosing to make her body have this miscarriage right now. So, as opposed to getting an abortion where she's intentionally thinking, okay, I'm going to go, you know, making the choice to get the abortion and, you know, terminate the pregnancy or whatever. I mean, that seems like a very relevant distinction, right? I mean, I don't know, I guess I'm just not...
I am not convinced that it is a relevant distinction. I think that we have certain distinctions within law regarding motives and intent, primarily for punitive reasons rather than strictly moral reasons. But I mean, I think that is apples to oranges with the biological functioning of a body. I think that people balk at this notion because we are tied very much to this notion of choice. And while I'm not a determinist, strong or otherwise, I don't think the idea that the body doesn't choose in some sense to do some of the things that it does, like terminate a pregnancy, seems to me a complete misunderstanding of what some biological function.
Well, you can do things that affect your body, though. Like, for example, if you don't eat right or if you don't exercise, you can affect the health of your biological system. So, but I don't see how that really takes away the idea that there's this difference between the mother choosing to terminate the pregnancy by her own conscious decision versus the body, for whatever reason, having a miscarriage. I don't see how that.
There's no distinction because I don't see them as distinct. My view of mind and my view of body is one fluid thing. It's not any. I don't see. I think that a separation, the separation that we create between the driven and the thing that drives, is entirely made up. It's a fiction that we make.
James, I want to say something here.
Well, let Lance speak. He wants to speak. Go ahead.
So yeah, I have something to throw out. First of all, it sounds like you're trying to say that the mind and the body are the same, they're identical, but no one thinks that the uterus is identical to the mind, right? It's the brain that's identical to the mind, if anything. So
yeah, but the
it would
uterus
be
is
the
identical
brain
to the
that would
body,
make
right?
what? No, but the
uterus
body
is identical
so
to the body.
when people try to say that the body is identical to the mind, they're not actually saying the body, they're saying the brain. That mental states in some way supervene on brain states. Not that
Some
mental
people might
states
say that. I
supervene
don't say
on your leg, or that they supervene on your big toe. Nobody thinks that. But second of all, say for example, sneezing. Someone rigged something up so when you sneezed, someone would die. And now you don't want to kill anybody, right? But you sneeze. You can't control it. You just sneeze. Your body does it, and you kill the person. Is that murder? All of a sudden, right? Like we could rig any thought experiment up like that, and that just seems so silly to say that because someone acted in a certain way, or I don't know, you put a shoe on their foot and put a knife to the shoe and you knock their knee, their leg just kicks up in the air and stabs someone, right? Like, are they murdering someone because of that? I don't know. I think there's huge problems with what you're saying.
Yeah,
but
I would agree completely with that, Lance.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Because like, if you're saying that there's no distinction, then how can you say that someone did not make a conscious decision to murder someone versus like using Lance's hypothetical scenario of someone having their reflexes, having a knife tied to their foot, and then having their reflexes instigate where it stabs someone in there. You know, I don't.
Okay, but I mean, in some of the examples that you're giving, you're talking about things outside of the body acting on the body, and then the body acting with things outside of the body against other things. We're talking about the whole body being one thing, the mind, and all the way down to the uterus, and you act as though, because you can think of a concept of an artificial womb, that somehow an actual womb is also something that is outside of the body, and it is not.
Wait, we weren't talking about.
We're not talking about artificial womb. We're talking about like the difference between consciously terminating a pregnancy versus a miscarriage.
But how does that matter? If you're still, but you say that there's a distinction between a spontaneous abortion and an elective abortion. And yet, when you try to argue that, you try to make it as though the uterus is this distinct object that happens outside of the body and is not a part of the body. Otherwise, your argument doesn't hold. It is the same thing. The intention doesn't matter. I would love it if Garrett could come.
That doesn't answer my question, though. What's the difference between? Oh, again, that goes back to my original question. What's the difference between a woman going to an abortion clinic and asking the abortion doctor to operate an abortion versus the body shutting down and having a miscarriage against the woman's will?
I say that there's no recognizable distinction. And just to clarify, Lance, I know that when most people say mind and body, they mean brain and body, but I actually mean mind and body. I see the distinction as entirely contrived.
Well, I gotta give you credit, James. You threw me for a bit of a loop. I did not expect this kind of reply. So I guess I'll give you points for that one. Gary.
I don't think that it's crazy. I think,
I think it is
with all due respect, Lance, I think that any reasonable understanding of biology and neurology and the intertwinedness of our bodies and our brains renders such thinking of this as being crazy as just sort of overstating the case.
Well, our brains have a drastically different physiology from any other part of our body.
You know,
I don't really.
Our lungs have a drastically different physiology than our foot. I don't see what difference that makes.
I say here that intentionality makes all the difference. For example,
that physiology manifests in particularly different ways, which is relevant to the. I assume, given again, I've been back and forth, but I assume that topic matter is relevant to the conditions that would generally behoove one to give somebody personhood. And I don't think that the lung is ever a relevant feature in the conversation. I think that and that for the most part, you could have an individual that has almost no other organs except for the brain, and still be conditionally without any issues considered a human being. I think that's the primary issue in trying to revoke the kind of specialness of where the brain falls into the general schema.
I'd also like to say, isn't there a morally relevant distinction between supposing I'm giving someone what I think is medicine or whatever, but it turns out to be an injection of poison, right? But I didn't know that, right? That would be, we wouldn't say I did anything morally wrong, but if I gave the person the poison knowing it was poison, like I intentionally poisoned them, that would be wrong, wouldn't it? Garrett, I see he wants to say something.
Yeah, this is somewhat sort of a marginal point, but it is worth pointing out that my understanding of the current state of neuroscience, no one actually wants to reduce things to just the brain. It actually does involve a lot more than the brain. It involves the much further, more extensive understanding of the nervous system writ large. And so while it's certainly true that the lungs aren't part of what gives it give us moral status. If you lose a leg and have your leg cut off, it doesn't transform the nature of your being. But it is still a mistake to think of consciousness as sort of existing only in the brain, and presumably consciousness is closely related to moral status. It's more accurate to think of people as being embodied, and that they're having bodies as being sort of essential for understanding who they are and what their nature is.
Yeah, but that's no more to the point than saying that I can't walk properly without being able to hear for the most part because it allows for my balance, and saying that I can't walk properly without feet. Right? I mean, that's the distinction, right? Correct? I mean, yeah, there are other signifying factors which are relevant towards the general framework of humanity and consciousness and our capacity to kind of act as a mind, right? But again, it's no more to the point than saying that there's a difference between saying you can't walk because you don't have feet, and you can't walk because your balance is impaired due to your lack of hearing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I certainly see a difference there, but at the same time, I think my caution here is more about oversimplifying, I think, the nature of the person to just being sort of a brain, and that leads to sort of these Cartesian brain vat type scenarios. We are not just brains, we are embodied, and to fully understand us, you have to understand the body as a whole. Now, certain parts of the body are, of course, more essential than others. Certainly the brain is the most important part of the body, but we should not marginalize or neglect the other parts of the body.
It seems like using Lisa and James' argument, though, would basically taken to its logical conclusion would be the same as saying that dying from alcohol poisoning is the same as committing suicide.
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah, I would have to agree with
that. The point that I understand is that James and Lisa is trying to make is that for the body to terminate the fetus in any kind of way other than with the woman's deliberate intent is essentially the same. So, for example, also consuming too much alcohol accidentally and dying would be the same as suicide, even though you're not intending to kill yourself.
Maybe there's a way to again, I don't want to speak for James or Lisa, but I mean, I have heard, I think, the basis of their argument, and perhaps there's a way to sort of modify it or in a way that perhaps can get around this particular concern. Human bodies, unless they are incredibly old or incredibly sick, don't just spontaneously die. It's something that we actually are pretty hard to kill in a lot of ways. That's not true for zygotes, for newly fertilized embryos, newly implanted embryos. They die spontaneously all the time. So it would be, perhaps, again, this is the version of their argument, which I don't know if they would accept or not, but I'm just sort of thinking on the fly here. Perhaps we could say that it is curious, if not problematic, to morally problematize something that happens automatically, naturally, all the time. In fact, probably more often than the actual process of successful conception to birth. When done in such a way, spontaneously and naturally by the woman's body, to then say if it is deliberately caused by a person, then it's morally problematic. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, but I'm taking a shot.
I would say that's another way of stating what I'm getting at. Yeah. Also, I would say the reason that we get hung up on things like suicide versus alcohol poisoning is because we have these like deeply entrenched terms for things, and we're very connected to these notions that we have surrounding these terms, right? It seems like a very strong distinction to us that suicide is one thing and drinking yourself to death is another, right? I don't think that it really seems that strong. I recognize that we have different words for those, and that the concepts are subtly different. But I fail to see how it's a drastic difference in term.
Well, I think we've definitely spent a good time on this. I would like. As interesting as this James's idiosyncratic position has been,
it's
here.
really not that interesting. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's just I would just wait. Tim's saying something in the comments here. Huh. Interesting. Tim here. Read what Tim's saying. Tim Sayho. I'm probably mispronouncing his last name here in the comments. Says, what would defenders of the spontaneous abortion argument say about sudden infant death syndrome? If infants really did die spontaneously, then does that mean we can kill them at will?
I'm not sure how that follows.
Yeah, I have no idea why that would follow. That sounds like just a reason. Does Tim just want to kill infants? I'm not quite sure how.
No, I think his point is that if we take the argument that Lisa and James have been making seriously, that it's okay to have abortions because zygotes spontaneously abort all the time, then by the parity of reasoning, because infants oftentimes will suddenly just die for no apparent reason, that it must be then okay to kill infants.
Yeah, okay, I didn't see the start of that argument. I mean, the first place I would go with that is, well, okay, to start, I would goddamn not take that argument that Lisa and James took. But assuming I took that argument, I'd have to object based on the numbers. So just relatively not uncommon. Whereas spontaneous abortions happen all the time, like all the goddamn time. So I mean,
continue. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, so if we're, I mean, again, everything seems, by the way, this entire argument seems to be coming to arbitrary cutoff points. Every portion of this argument is an arbitrary cutoff point. At what month do we no longer consider this thing to be a fetus or consider it to be a human being? Is it the last 2 days before the baby's born? Is it right after the baby's born? Is it 6 months before the baby's born? When does something be considered conscious? And every single piece of this is the same thing. We're going to have to pick an arbitrary number where, well, listen, if a third of babies are dying spontaneously, well then, it doesn't make a difference. Or if a fifth, or you know what I mean. Half of these points wherein we have to decide what the matter is are completely arbitrary as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So I'm still wanting to go through some of the other, probably more conventional pro-choice views somebody might have on here. I'm curious to hear view here. So Avi, what do you think makes a person a person, and what point does the fetus acquire the status of person?
Riddell, your mic again.
So what?
Riddell's mic is
yeah.
kicking back, as well as Jacob's. Anyway, okay, so continuing. I actually, to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer. So it's meaning I know when I would say for sure, and I know when I would say for sure not, but I don't know where where like the laces cross. Essentially, I don't know at what point where the moment is where it's distinct, right? To some extent, it's a case by case, right? But at the same time, my basis is not particularly about human consciousness in particular. So for me, it's more of an issue of pain than anything else. It's partially an issue of whether or not it's viable outside of the womb. There are a bunch of little coalescing factors that come together, but I don't think that I have some grand schematic system that works out.
Okay, interesting. So you think pain is sort of more or less kind of, I don't know, I mean, okay, I guess what are you sure of here? Like, at what point would you definitively say it's not a person at this point, and then what definitive point would you say, well, it definitely is a person at that point?
So okay, so there are obvious knots. So before a heartbeat, there's certainly nothing to be find particularly interesting about the fetus. Although that's not my cutoff. But that's like, that to me seems like a necessary given, right? There's no reason at all to consider anything even remotely alive until there's a heartbeat, which is essentially the sustaining, which is more or less the sustaining rhythm of human life, right? Now, that's not good enough for me, by the way, just as a matter, because if it was just a heart, I would say we can kill it anyway, right? If it never burned, if there weren't other factors that were with it, right? It would have to be some combined factor of brain development is going to be primary for me for whatever reason. But there at a certain point, probably somewhere at about the 20 to 25 week mark.
Okay, interesting. And I know last time I had this abortion conversation, Garrett explained his view, and Garrett, just so I understand, you have the gradualist view, right? You think that it's sort of he thinks it's sort of a gradual process, like there's no point where it just bam becomes a person. It sort of happens gradually throughout the pregnancy. So, like, say fetuses in the later stages have more rights or whatever than, say, in the first trimester fetuses. Is that I mean, basically right, Garrett?
I would think so. I would think so because I carry this over further, right? So prior to, I don't have this thing where I assume that an unborn individual would want life, right? I don't have this thing where I assume that they can request that their life not be terminated. So let's say to the extent that you have somebody who's 45 years old and they go into a coma. As far as I'm concerned at that point, unless they've expressly requested that their life continue, they're purely the property of whoever it is that they've willed their life over to. So when the doctor says pull the plug, unless they've expressly said don't, I have no issue with the person pulling the plug on them.
Wait, so even if it was a temporary coma, like if we knew the person was going to wake up in a month or two?
Probably.
Really?
Yeah, because it's a little shoddy for me, but to the extent that they're incapable. No, because I mean, if they said I'm going to come for 2 months, I'll see you in 2 months. There's the presumptive assumption that they're not going to want to not see you in 2 months, right? Whereas if they were saying something like I'm in pain, I hate my life, things along those lines, I don't see any particular reason why. I don't. I mean, because I think that it's a matter of present state, not an issue of potential state, right? So I mean, because the problem with this I see is that, let's say someone's in a coma, we don't know how long it's going to last. The coma could last 6 weeks, could last 6 years, but there's the potential that they'll come out of the coma. So it doesn't make a difference to me whether or not we know they're going to wake up in 2 months, or they will possibly or probably wake up in 6 years, because it's the same thing. So I'm behooved to have the same answer for the same point.
Oh, Jake says he wants to defend you a little bit, Avi.
That was actually you said that we have a presumption that a person wants to if you put them in a coma and they say see you in 2 months, we have a presumption that they want to continue their life. And I think a really good answer, okay, maybe not a really good answer, but I'll let you guys judge. Maybe we can just say there's always a presumption that a person in a temporary coma would want to continue his life, because I'm probably going to sound very imperialistic here, but I think it's safe to say that suicide is almost never the rational choice for a person. I mean, maybe unless you're like have a terminal illness and you're doomed to die a horrible, painful death. Suicide is not the rational choice, and it could be caused by mental illness. So even if a person says I hate my life, I want to die, I don't think that would invalidate the presumption that a person has an interest in preserving his own life.
Well, but why think that desires are the morally decisive factor in the first place when it comes to the right to life? I mean, I don't think. I think the desire. I think if you base a right to life on desires, which is what people like Peter Singer and David Boonin do, I think you run into all sorts of problems, like the suicide example. What about if it's because we desire to live that it's therefore wrong to kill us? Then what you do get it. What about somebody who's suicidal? Or better yet, I'd rather like Francis Beckwith's example of the problem of the indoctrinated slave, which is, he says, imagine a scenario where somebody has, a slave owner has conditioned and indoctrinated a group of slaves to not desire to be free or to continue living. So the guy is able to do whatever he wants with them because they don't desire to live or to be free or anything. That seems to be a pretty clear counterexample for somebody who's wants to use the desire account of rights anyway.
Okay, Jake is handing it over to me because he says I have a really interesting answer. I'm not precisely sure which answer he's thinking of, but I know at least one answer, which is an answer that Peter Singer has given several times. And again, Singer, as a utilitarian, his interest is in maximizing satisfied desires. And if we yield to the person's desire who's suicidal to end their life today, then any other future desires which may be satisfied will not be satisfied. So we can make the rational prediction that if we by frustrating his desire to die today, we will maximize his satisfied desires later on in the future. As for the indoctrinated slave, I mean, I think that's probably a harder problem in a lot of ways. I mean, I think Beckwith's particular version is perhaps a little fanciful, but there's certainly all sorts of examples of people getting indoctrinated with false consciousness and stuff like that. I think of battered spouse syndrome and stuff like that. So I find that probably to be the harder case. But there's a pretty simple solution to that too, and that's you can have sort of a corrected preference view of some variety, where the relevant preferences are the ones that the person would have. For example, if they had all relevant information, or if they had if they weren't sort of compromised by standard cognitive impairments, things like brain damage or drug abuse, or in this case, presumably the sort of the brainwashing of the slave. Now, there's problems with all these proposals, of course, but they do show that the dialogue is more complicated than simply, well, here's this set of counterexamples, therefore the desire can't possibly work.
Well, okay, well, sure. I mean, I'm aware. I've heard that reply before, but I mean, yeah, you're right. It doesn't end with a counterexample, but I still think that the counterexamples can be defended, and that it can still be shown that this desire account doesn't work here. So
sure, and I'm not particularly wedded to the desire account myself, as I am not a utilitarian and not a preference theorist. I mean, to my mind, desires and preferences obviously matter. I don't think anyone can say that they're morally irrelevant, and I don't think anyone would want to say that. But the broader question is, is there anything else that matters on top of that? And what is most important when desires conflict with other moral values? And I don't think there's any sort of easy, straightforward calculus to sort those things.
Oh, hold on a second. Avi is talking to me in chat. Okay. No, yeah. Certainly desires are important here, but it seems to me that people like Peter Singer and David Boonin are sort of offering this as a necessary condition for rights. It's just, I think, the reason they used to disqualify the fetus, because they offer this as you have to have desires, and since a fetus does not have desires, therefore it's not a person. I think that's how they say it. They say it's a necessary condition. So,
hey, Jake, quick question. Avi was discussing basically do not resuscitate contexts for people in comas. Are you of the opinion that if someone has a do not resuscitate order that they are committing suicide, or were you just throwing that term in sort of out of context, or did I miss some context there? Yes, Jake, I'm asking you.
Well, that's a very interesting question, because
Let me just expand, because you said that we can assume that suicide is never the rational choice, right? You said something to that effect.
Well, I wouldn't say, God. That's, I mean, I didn't say never. For one, I did not categorically say that suicide is not the rational choice. But for someone, I said that it could be rational for someone who, say, is dying of terminal illness. Well, I mean, I don't know anybody who did not have a terminal illness who had a do not resuscitate order on them. But you were asking the morally relevant difference. I'm
not asking for a morally relevant difference. I'm just asking for clarification, because I'm not sure I understand what your position is precisely.
Well, I'm not. I'm just, arguing, playing devil's advocate here. I'm not sure whether I actually believe this, but I was just had an idea of how we could save Avi's, I guess, morality from this objection, because he sort of bit the bullet there when he said that, it is that a person who was in a coma, a temporary coma that we knew was temporary, was not actually a person, or that it would be morally different to, I guess, not revive them or kill them or whatever. And I would say that, even on the desires account.
But here's the thing. The point is, it doesn't get trapped there, right? Because they're not necessarily going to be, pulling the plug now isn't some kind of granted allowability, right? The same way that I couldn't walk into your house and break your TV, it would become an issue of property. So to be fair, it still doesn't sound very good, but it would become an issue of property to me more than anything else, because this person has no personal allowance. I don't understand what it is that I'd be referencing and saying they have a right to not have X, Y, and Z happen to them. They don't know what's happening. They can't reference it. They can't have anything to do with it. It will never make a difference to them in the end. There'd be no referential relationship to the event except for us pinpointing person A as we understand them due to simply sentimental issues. Because once a person's in a coma, it's purely sentiment. There's nothing about them that's real anymore as a human being except for their DNA and our sentiment towards them. But the primary features that we consider human about them are no longer there. They're no longer present.
So, but if they don't have rights or whatever, I mean, but wouldn't it, say, still be wrong for, say, if somebody rapes a woman while she's in a coma but leaves no trace?
Only to the extent that there's somebody who cares for her that would not approve of it. Only to the extent, which is the same reason that to me it'd be the equivalent to necrophilia. I mean, only to the extent that person's sister may not want you to. That person's friend.
So then, what about what if it's an orphan? Like somebody has no family, nobody really.
Society cares about this person. I guess I'll play like the Berkeleyan thing, where someone is thinking about them somewhere. It's okay, but to an extent, I don't think that person intrinsically has any value anymore.
Oh, interestingly though, but you say society cares about this person, so it'd be wrong. But then, by that token, shouldn't abortion be wrong then? Because
yeah, but I think that anything is more. In theory, morally wrong, as long as society thinks so, right? I want to say I'm a moral nihilist, but I want the word morality to still have meaning, right? I think the word morality should still have meaning, but it doesn't have meaning if I say that it purely means nothing, that nothing could ever be moral. So as far as I'm concerned, morality is simply kind of general sentiment, right? You can have your own personal morality if I want to use it that way, but then it becomes nothing other than ice cream, right? And I'm fine with that, but to an extent, most people are not capable of understanding it in that context. In which case, I'm okay with saying, again, like Kevin Harris tried to pin me down in the hangout, and he said, well, then when slavery was okay, was it okay? If everyone agreed that we should just start killing Asians, would that be all right? Well, yes, it would be all right. It would be all right, and there's nowhere for me to go from there. Yes, it would be all right. I don't know what to tell you, because I wouldn't approve of it personally, but it would be morally okay, because the moral sentiment would be heading in that direction. And I just think that the word moral is too respected in and of itself. I don't respect the word moral in any particular way.
Garrett really seems to want to say something, so go ahead, Garrett.
Yes, Avi, I have to say I admire courage. I admire people who can stick to the preposterous conclusions that their positions end up entailing. But yeah, for me, just from what it's worth, I have a different approach to this, and my approach comes, again, from sort of a virtue ethics point of view. I think I can make perfect sense of why it's wrong to rape the woman who's in the permanent coma and is never going to come out of it, or to use your other example, necrophilia. Why is it wrong to do this? I mean, I think you can make sense of why it's wrong to do it, completely excluding any reference at all to the moral value of the woman, and simply say, what does this say about the man who does this? What, the person who indulges in this kind of behavior? What kind of person is he? How would you characterize him? And it seems to me that, again, barring some context that we don't understand, some sort of strange cultural differences that are beyond us, it seems pretty clear that there's going to be all kinds of terrible vices that are going to be the appropriate way of characterizing that kind of person. So I would say that the reason why it's wrong to do it is because of what it does to him and what it says about him. And that, to me, I mean, I hate just sort of fist pounding, but that to me seems to be so sort of straightforwardly clear that I have a difficulty believing that anyone could seriously deny it.
Well, that's just a reference to what it says about. Again, that goes back to a value statement, right? Whether or not we as a society will then claim that what this person did is incorrect because they didn't show a certain sentiment that we think they should be showing towards the individual that they acted out towards. That's all it is. That's all you've just said, but you've removed any value content. And that's my problem, is that it purely is an issue of value content. Because
I wouldn't say sentiment necessarily is the right word. I mean, sentiment certainly is going to be part of it, but there's going to be more to it than just sentiment. How we relate to people isn't simply a matter of sentiment. It involves a complex array of things, some of which are sentimental and emotive, but others involve other things. Go ahead.
So what's the rationale for the assessment that something is wrong with the individual who did this, right? What's the rationale for saying that what he did is doing something negative to his psyche, or he's becoming a kind of person, or he is a certain kind of person, right? Because unless I misunderstood, that's where you were going with this.
Yeah, I think the rationale is that human beings have a particular sort of biological and social constitution, and there's a lot of variability within that, but some things tend to be good for human beings, given our biological and social and psychological constitutions, and some things tend to be caustic and coercive of those constitutions. And again, I don't want to make a sort of universal claim that necrophilia could never possibly be something that satisfies a human virtue. There's a lot of variety out there. But if we're imagining a sort of straightforward case without any exceptional circumstances, where someone just is deciding to rape this woman, that reflects, pretty clearly reflects a vicious character, and that's a person who's not going to live well and not going to have a good life as a human being.
Yeah, but that's irrelevant. But that's irrelevant to the fact that it was a person. Because if they had walked into your house and done that to your pet cat, it wouldn't have changed. The context of the change, because you've moved the issue from the interpersonal action to the action itself and what that reflects of the person's character. It's a character-based analysis rather than an interactional-based analysis. And as a result, it removes the kind of generally innate character of the morality argument for however long it's been going on, right? I mean, to an extent, it doesn't care what you're doing. It could have been a rock that you were doing it to. If you get frustrated and you walk over and you beat the wall with your fist, it doesn't mean bad about your character. You're incapable of controlling your anger. So whether you can control it enough that you don't hit a human being and instead you hit a wall, it still says the same thing about your character, just that where you can put the brakes on is slightly different. And so what is it? The person who can control their character enough not to hit a human being, but to break that person's TV, that person is slightly more moral. Is that the gauge for the moral framework? It seems to me very kind of whatever, right? Like it's just okay.
I would say different character traits are reflected between the person who smashes a wall, smashes a TV, versus someone who wants to rape a corpse or rape a woman in a coma.
Right. No, that's fine. I moved it to beating. Right. So if I got mad and I punched someone's wife or I punched someone's TV. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I recognize that the person who's raping women is probably a lot worse off than the person who's punching TVs. I'll give you that. It's like at the outset.
Yeah, I think
you need to mute your. I think you need to mute your mic, Rodel, because your screen is echoing.
Rodel, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Do you want to say something?
Maybe that was it. I mean, here's my problem, right? Because you're looking down from. I mean, Jake said in the comment section, if Cody Nelson suddenly decides to have sex with a 10-year-old dead person, there's obviously something wrong with Cody. I'm not quite sure why you need to. Okay. Riddell? No? We're good?
You can hear me?
I can hear myself through here.
I'm sorry because my computer is messing up. It's kind of old. It was not old. It's just messed up. But I don't have a very well thought out position on morality as for philosophy. But my position is very similar. I guess it's similar to Gareth in that I think that there are certain moral stances that are more conducive to human nature than others. So, for example, I think on the topic of, say, slavery, which is what you brought up, Avi, in the comments section on Facebook, I think that if there was a debate, there was an essay on libertarianism where they pointed out the debate that goes on between libertarians regarding whether or not slavery is ethical. And they had this discussion because they justified their morality is surrounded around this idea of volunteerism. So some argued that, well, technically, since if something is voluntary, it's obviously moral. Therefore, slavery is moral if it's voluntary. And others who already had some sort of contrived justification for why that wasn't the case. And my position is, if slavery was a position for a human being to ethically be in, then human beings would tolerate being in that position, and they generally don't. Like, for example, when slavery ended in the United States, thousands of slaves had just up and left. They refused to stay and to work on the farm. There was thousands of people who just up and left. They refused to stay, remain as slaves. Some did remain employed to their with their former slave owners, and the contracts were, of course, rigged. They couldn't read. But for the most part, they didn't. A lot of people didn't stay around, and there were several rebellions throughout American history. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, but then every teenager from the ages of 10 or 11 through 17, is essentially that farmer. Like, their parents are apparently acting unethically because they're not letting them do what they want, because they're not tolerating the circumstances that have been set upon them. I mean, I don't know if that's quite a good.
Do you think teenagers are cognitively developed as human beings?
I think they're cognitively developed enough to be unhappy with the circumstances that they've been put in. And that's pretty much the only marker that you've laid out, and I'm just applying it towards teenagers. I thought that was okay.
Well, when I say conducive to human nature, I don't just mean whether or not they're happy. I mean, is it helpful? Is it productive? Is it favorable? Does it generally in the welfare of? Does it generally work in the welfare of individual human beings and humanity as human beings as a society? That's what I mean by conducive to human nature. I don't mean specifically do they enjoy being in that position. And I was going to add to that the way in which slavery was justified was basically by denying slaves their humanity. It was by saying that they were not intelligent enough, or they were childlike, and they therefore could not reliably be relied upon to take care of themselves and act as human beings. So in order to justify slavery, they had to create this false argument, this obviously false argument, that slaves were essentially not human beings.
My sole like overarching problem that Redo, can you mute your mic when you're not talking? I don't know if you have, but okay, it's fine. My sole overarching problem that continues to arise here, like unquestionably, is that you have to value human life. If you don't, then you're simply going to say, and this is what Jake said before. Jake said, if Cody Nelson suddenly decided to have sex with a 10-year-old dead person, there's obviously something wrong with Cody, and that's fine. Cody's outside of the norm if that's the case. That doesn't say anything more than that. It doesn't say why he's wrong for wanting to. It just says that he doesn't fall within the general schema of who wanted to. I'm sorry, Cody. I'm not quite sure why you have to be the example, and I'm not quite sure how I have to be a dead 10-year-old. A 10-year-old would have been fine, or a dead person would have been fine, but dead 10-year-old is where we're at this point. So.
Right. It requires that human beings value human life, but
you can't set a precondition before the conversation starts. I mean, and this is the precondition we've all said, that part of the conversation means you have to value human life, and then we'll decide what that means exactly. Well, no, I don't. I'm a sociopath. I just don't. I value my own life, very few choice other things that make me happy, and everyone else can go to hell.
But if you're a sociopath, Avi, then you're pretty, almost by definition, you are falling outside of the norm of the human being. There's something wrong with you if you are a sociopath.
And that's fine. But the question is, so I can only be moral given a certain brain chemistry? I mean, like, or
you
know what I mean?
Moral as a human being if you fall within a certain species, typical human functioning. Again, I mean that's a standard sort of Aristotelian approach.
Yeah, but the problem is that the more we research this, the more we know that it's not quite that simple, right? There's no perfectly drawn line. So again we're gonna have to find an arbitrary cutoff, right? So at what point do I now cross a line that can know? So now not only if I can't be part of this moral game, then I'm not even properly human. Human law can't even apply to me at that point then. Because if you're going to say that somebody who now is outside of this framework because they're not human enough to have a moral framework, well then they're not properly human. So we could abort them right now. So they're 38, we can abort them today.
That's what we say about sociopaths. That's why we don't consider them responsible for their actions. That's why we put them in mental hospitals instead of prisons.
We don't think they're not human. We just think that they're human, but that they're having other issues. That they're imbued with other problems that force their hand into certain circumstances, right? So, why does it stop? Why does it stop at morality, right? Let's say you have somebody who's obese who can't stop eating, right? Are they not properly human because they don't have that same demarcation in their biological system which allows them to stop eating food? We only take this approach when it comes to how we treat other human beings, but we don't take this approach when it comes to anything else that falls outside of the standard norm of humanity.
That's not true. We take this responsibility into how people treat themselves too. But you're right. There is no hard and fast line. It's a family resemblance, Wittgensteinian kind of thing. It's a cluster property, and the same thing is true, I think, of fetuses. So it doesn't seem to me to be. I mean, it's difficult, and obviously in the borderline cases. But you're right that sociopaths aren't non-human, but they fail to have the necessary human capacities in order to flourish as a human. And that means that they are going to be, both exempt from certain senses of responsibility, but also held to certain particular standards that requires them to flourish as the rest of us.
Right. So I mean, I don't necessarily think that should be a problem for morality, but for the sake of continuing the argument, I will continue the conversation. I will disregard sociopaths. People do kill. People do act immorally outside of sociopathic contexts. Now, my issue is, right, was every single slave owner sociopathic? Was every single murderer sociopathic? They're not. So there's obviously a breach. There's obviously a breach of understanding as to what constitutes an appropriate value, and to an extent, given that we don't all value the same things, how we gear our behavior and our moral compass is inherently tied to the things that we value. And when those values suddenly change, were they to suddenly change for the entire group of individuals in society, so too does the moral compass. And I don't know if it makes sense to look back on and retroactively apply this and say, well, they obviously weren't properly flourishing as a human being because they weren't taking the approach that we take now towards the betterment towards of every human.
I find this to be a fascinating. Go ahead, Rodolphe.
I think.
Rodolphe.
Yeah, I think in regards to you talked about how arbitrary it is to say, well, this person isn't quite human enough. Where do you make the cutoff line for when someone is human, how somebody is not, such as in relation to sociopathy or any other mental condition? I would say, even though we don't necessarily agree as to where the line is drawn, obviously the line is going to be arbitrary. I don't think it necessarily follows from that because a human being is so you can't decide where that diverging line is, that therefore there isn't a diverging line at some point for some reason because we can't agree on when somebody becomes an adult doesn't mean there isn't some distinction between what it means to be an adult and what it means to be a child.
Or like beard and stubble, right? Just because I don't know exactly when stubble becomes a beard doesn't mean I can't tell the difference between the two.
There's a name for this actually. It's called Loki's. What's that?
It's called the beard fallacy.
It's probably that could be another name for it, but I've always referred to it as Loki's wager. Because there's a Norse myth in which Loki makes a bet with the ice giants and he loses the bet, and the stakes were his head, and so the ice giants come to claim his head, and he says, fine, you may have my head, but you may not have a single piece of my neck. and then a huge debate happens over precisely where the head ends and where the neck begins, and because they cannot draw the line specifically, Loki gets to walk away with his head. And yeah, so the idea being that just unless we can specify precisely what a concept means, then we cannot have a discussion about it or use it in any sort of context.
Yeah, I mean that's fine. I like that. I've heard that before, actually. I guess my primary concern with any of this is that I've never heard one of these. I guess to be fair, Garrett, your assessment as focusing on let's say humanity building or as opposed to putting intrinsic value in an individual and then talking about breaking that intrinsic value as the kind of the demarcation from morality poses a slightly less problem for me. But again, there's still an issue as to what connotes the best behaviors towards building an individual as the best they can possibly be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a single set. Again, it is going to be a cluster of properties. Some properties will allow people to flourish in some regards at the expense of others. Some people might be particularly brilliant but have no emotional intelligence. Some people might be particularly sensitive but not terribly smart. So there isn't a sort of single metric for what it means to flourish as a human being. We're complex beings, and we have many different dimensions, and they can't all be satisfied in harmony with each other. But ideally, the effort is to harmonize as much of these values as possible. And as much as I'm enjoying this conversation, it seems like we have gotten off the topic of abortion a fair bit.
I was actually about to redirect us back a little bit here. So if that's okay, I mean, this has been interesting, but I would like to redirect it back a little bit here. I was actually wanting, Garrett, to offer a sort of a critique of your view of personhood. I first just want to make sure I've got your view correctly here, right? So again, you're the gradualist position, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, explain a little bit more to me here about why exactly you think that view works, or how does that work exactly? Like, what properties does the fetus gradually acquire that sort of makes it more and more valuable as the pregnancy goes through?
Well, it ties into what I was saying earlier about it being sort of a family resemblance or a cluster property. There is no sort of necessary and sufficient conditions for what it means to be sort of a person or a human being, whichever term you want to use. But we can point to some things that are generally relevant, like the capacity to feel pain, the capacity to think, the capacity to have experiences, memory, etc., and so forth. And it seems to me that precisely why we think that rocks and skin cells and plants lack any kind of moral status is because they lack any of these properties. They fall completely outside the cluster. When you start sort of going up from the zygote, which is, to my mind, effectively the equivalent of a skin cell, and you start developing more and more, you do start moving in a direction where the fetus has more and more of these properties. And now there's a lot we don't know and understand about fetal development, in particular neurodevelopment. So there is a lot of gray area here. It might turn out that future science might revise our thinking on this. But my understanding of the current science is that the things that we are particularly interested with about when it comes to adult human beings, and that's things like consciousness, the capacity to feel pain, rudimentary sapience and stuff like that, starts to set in somewhere between the 20th and the 24th week, and very gradually develops from there. So if you are like me, broadly speaking, a naturalist about ethics, then you think that it's going to be the natural biological properties that matter, and the natural biological properties come in very, very gradually, and so hence the moral status of the fetus should scale with those biological properties.
Okay, all right. Well, there are two critiques I have for this here. Okay, so first off, you would agree that one, you got this cluster of properties, right? That one of these, if you just took one of those properties by themselves, would not do, right? Like, just one of those properties wouldn't do it. They have to be like clustered together to matter, right?
That's kind of a hard one. I mean, I'm not sure, again, in terms of actual reality, if you ever actually could have something that would have one of these. I mean, neurophysiologically, these things are so intertwined.
Well, I guess my question is, individually, right? Each of these properties individually aren't doing the work. It's combining them together that does the work, right?
No, I mean, I could buy something along the lines of, that some properties are so important, like, say, the capacity to feel pain. I mean, if something had the capacity to feel pain, but nothing else, then it would still be wrong, I think, to inflict pain upon that thing. So some properties are more central to the cluster than others. So I think that you can have ones that are important enough so by themselves it's going to give the being a substantial amount of moral status, but not the same moral status as an adult human being.
Just because I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just seems to me though that if one were to say that it's not one of these properties, because it doesn't seem to me like the capacity for pain really works as a personhood property. I mean, like if each property on its own were to get, like, say, were to not work and have a philosophical zero here, it doesn't seem to me how adding them together is somehow going to constitute something that matters. Like, I mean, I guess where I was going with the question is, like, think of, like, for example, let's say I think that blonde hair, right, is what makes you a person. Well, we would say, well, no, that's not what makes you a person, right? We'd also say that having blue eyes does not make you a person, or having dark skin doesn't make you a person. Each of these properties individually doesn't work at all, but it doesn't seem to help adding them together and adding 3 more or 300 more of these and saying, well, but I'm putting this all together, right, to sort of make it stronger, and all these properties put together, even though individually are irrelevant, constitute personhood and what makes us valuable. So, I mean...
Well, there's a couple of responses to that. One is that's strikingly similar to your beard fallacy. You know, I have a certain amount of stubble right here. That's not a beard. But if you double that stubble and then double it again, and then double it again, I pretty clearly do have a beard. So there are certainly some circumstances where you can start with something that does not qualify and then simply add on more of the same, and then eventually it will qualify.
But like,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's like, you know, like a bad argument or for a property has 0 strength here. I mean, it's not like a thread. I mean, because sometimes I hear people use this gradual position. They give like a thread analogy. I've heard. If this is a straw, if you don't think it's a good analogy, let me know. But I hear some people give a thread analogy, like they say an individual thread might not hold something up, but you put all the threads together, it'll make a rope. But I mean, it doesn't seem to me that arguments are analogous to threads. If you have a bad argument, right, it gets a 0, and it doesn't seem to me how combining them all together is going to make a stronger argument if each one individually is worthless.
Well, they're properties, not arguments, that we're talking about here.
But you're arguing for each of these properties to have value, right? And it doesn't. And if it seems that if you can't say that any of these individually work, it doesn't seem to me how combining them together is somehow going to make it any better. But
I mean, that is exactly how arguments work, right? I mean, a single premise of an argument by itself is not going to entail the conclusion. I mean, unless it's a one-premise argument. But if you take each of the premises in isolation, the argument will fail. But you put all the premises together, and if it's a valid argument and the premises are true, it will succeed.
Okay, well, but again, it's like, you know, let's say I give some kind of argument, again, for why, say, blue eyes constitutes personhood, and we might all agree that, you know, that argument doesn't work, right? But then maybe I give a separate argument, right, for why dark skin makes us a person. Well, that argument doesn't work because that property fails for such and such reasons, right? But then, you know, and I keep continually giving arguments for an individual property constituting personhood. Each argument fails. Then again, how does combine those separate arguments and say, well, but wait, what if I combine all those arguments together? Then that makes it stronger, right? But no, it doesn't seem to do that.
No, so okay, so to this, it makes sense to actually go back to the methodology. I mean, the way I approach the issue is, okay, so we start by taking things which are uncontroversially have moral status, and that is normal, regular, grown adult human beings. And then we ask the question, what is it about them that we think is valuable? What is it that we think makes them have moral status? And, you know, take something like memory, for example. Clearly, memory is important. Now, there are people with, like, you know, severe anterior-grade amnesia, and anterior and retrograde amnesia. They lack memory. We clearly don't want to say that they're not persons, that they have no moral status. But clearly, there is something about them such that our moral relationship with them has changed dramatically because of their lack of this capacity to remember. I would have different sort of, you know, moral obligations towards this person than I would to a normal person. And that's sufficient to show that memory is a morally relevant capacity. And you can do the same thing with a variety of other traits. And so we can use this sort of method of, you know, examining people that or beings that we know have moral status, finding out what it is that's valuable about them, and that creates sort of our storehouse of morally relevant properties. And then from there we can ask, okay, if this is what makes people subjects and bearers of moral value, how do other things stack up to this? How do non-human animals stack up to this? How would aliens stack up to this? How would plants, trees, rocks, how would a fetus stack up to this? And we can use that method as a way of determining. So rather than sort of just picking arbitrary things like blonde hair and blue eyes and so forth and saying, well, those don't matter, but you put them all together and they do, we reverse engineer the morally relevant properties from us.
I'm not fully convinced. I think I just need more time to chew on a response to that here. But I guess, well, okay. I need more time to think about how to reply to that.
I mean, think about that for anything, for anything, Cody, right?
What?
Think about that context for anything, though. So if you had to explain, like, I've been trying to contemplate like a perfect example, but if you thought about that, for trying to explain, why three parts, why the Trinity constitute God, but not any particular part alone constitutes God, right? Nothing about, you could give me every explanation about why each of them in particular, well, no, that one isn't enough, that wasn't enough, and then unison all of a sudden they do. But you can think about that for even if you find that example to be shitty. I'm sure you could think of other examples where every individual item didn't have any special value, and then even as a union, they still don't, but you accept the fact that they do signify something different than each individual piece.
Well, okay, I guess I'll have to think about that more, but that's, I don't know, that's really sort of the opening kind of criticism I have, though. The real reason I reject the gradualist position is the second critique I have of that, but whatever. I don't know, maybe I can come back to that other one later, though, but I would like to sort of give this one here and see how this reacts, see what the response to this one is. It seems to me, I think the biggest problem with this gradualist position is I think it ultimately undermines equality, basically, equal rights. I mean, most people, myself included, would believe that, all humans, especially at least human persons, right, should be accorded equal rights, right? We hear this all the time here. But if our rights are based in degreed properties, right, such as sentience or what have you, these are all properties that come in degrees, it seems that equal rights goes right out the window, especially since the gradualist, like Garrett, admits that a late-term fetus has more moral standing than a early-term fetus. Well, but the problem is development still continues after birth, so it would seem to apply to even people who are indisputably human persons. So how does one ground human equality in this sense, Garrett?
I think it's a very good question. Well, the first thing, this is a minor point. I would not want to phrase anything about human equality in terms of rights, just because I'm not a rights theorist. I think rights make sense sort of in a social context and a legal context, but in terms of what we're talking about basic ethics, I think rights are nonsense on stilts. But still, the basic point about equality is certainly a good one. And I think we need to sort of understand what it is we're asking for and talking about when we talk about human equality. I mean, one thing seems clear is that human equality is not a descriptive characteristic. Human beings are not equal in all descriptions. That's why this is a problem in the first place. Not all human beings are equally intelligent, have as good memory, etc., and so forth. So back to my amnesia patient. He lacks memory. Does that mean that he isn't equal to the rest of us? In one sense, it's pretty clear that he's not equal to the rest of us. He lacks a property that we have. There's a difference between us. Does that mean that he does not deserve sort of equal consideration or equal treatment? Well, I think it does mean that he doesn't deserve equal treatment. We do not have to act towards him the same way we have to act towards other people, because the absence of his capacity to form memories makes the standard moral obligations that we have to people who can form memories irrelevant. So he is not entitled to equal treatment, but he is, I think, still entitled to equal consideration. We still have to take his interests into account. And in this here, I think I'm just poaching Peter Singer right here. But because of his different capacities, taking his interests into account means that we're going to treat him differently than we treat other people. So apply that same logic to, start with a zygote, right? Do we have to take the zygote's interests into account? Well, given its capacities, what are its interests going to be? The zygote to my reckoning, has no interest in anything. It doesn't care whether it lives or dies. It doesn't have any dreams, aspirations. It doesn't feel pain. Nothing that you do to it makes a difference to it at all. But that's not the case for like the 9-month-old fetus. It's pretty clear that the 9-month-old fetus can feel pain, doesn't want to be killed in some very sort of primitive sense of want to be. So it seems to me that you can call for equal treatment for zygotes, but that's going to be sort of a hollow position, or equal consideration for zygotes. But that's going to be hollow because given they have no capacities, they are not going to be bringing them into consideration will yield you nothing.
Well, I mean, we'll get to that a little bit when I explain my own view. But I mean, for example, like let's say you have the what was the example I was going to use? Like, so wouldn't you say though that wouldn't that mean this gradualist position if you're going to say that based on these reasons somebody deserves more consideration here? Wouldn't that mean that say somebody who you have like an ape, right, versus a child with Down syndrome, right? Let's say the ape, has higher consciousness, right? I mean, if you want to, if this sort of sentience kind of criteria is what gives them consideration, wouldn't that mean we owe more consideration to the ape? So, like, I mean, and I'm imagining a scenario here where you have, it's about saving, say, maybe a drowning Down syndrome person or a drowning ape here.
Right.
I mean, it would seem that because the ape has more consciousness, wouldn't this view mean that we have more consideration to the ape than to the Down syndrome kid?
I do want to clarify again. It's not as simple as just measuring the consciousness.
Right.
But yeah, if you were to put in all the relevant properties and stuff like that, and I mean, as a person who believes strongly in animal ethics, I think if you describe the case properly, I can imagine cases where saving an ape might be more important than saving a human. When it comes to Down syndrome in particular, I mean, I think my experience with Down syndrome people are that there can be some extreme cases, but by and large they're not so impaired as to make them below apes in most of the morally relevant considerations. But if you describe the proper situation, I have no problem with the idea that there will be circumstances in which saving apes or other non-human animals might take moral precedence over saving certain humans.
Well, kudos for consistency, I guess. But I certainly would disagree with that. Well, let's see here.
Right, but that's hinged to the inherent value argument, which itself needs to have
the thing is, it just seems
an argument.
To many people, though, myself included, it does not seem clear that we would have a greater duty to the ape in this case, that we would owe the greater duty to the child in this, or the human in this case here.
I mean, you're obviously preaching to the wrong crowd, because I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you don't have a duty to either. But as it stands, this is hinged on further value assessments. I don't know. Like, I've had this argument too, and people will just change the content. If you say, well, I want to have, you either have to save the homeless guy in the building or the dolphin at SeaWorld, and you go, well, the dolphin at SeaWorld or a doctor, and you're just altering it because you're going, well, if I save the doctor, he'll save 500 more people. If I save the dolphin, he'll make people happy, whereas the homeless people, in theory, may not. And you're just moving the goalposts as to what item is more particularly valuable for the person who's running into the building, and that's where the judgment call is going to be. I mean, again, your moral assessment, your ethical framework, your decision as to what the more moral outcome is for this burning building example is going to be, well, what do I consider more important for the thing it is that I'm running in to save?
I think back to Cody argues that the whole basis of equality is somehow compromised based on Garrett's position on abortion. Actually, we don't treat everyone equally. If someone lacks certain cognitive traits, then they aren't treated the same in the judicial system in our society as someone who is, a fully cognitively capable adult human being. So it does make perfect sense, based on existing law, to treat human beings at different levels of cognitive development differently.
Oh, well, I mean, okay.
And I think the problem that I just want to say, I think the problem that we're having here is there is no agreed upon definition of personhood. Like, personhood, I think, is what, to make an analogy to Garrett's point, is these traits that give us personhood, they're kind of like parts of a machine. The parts of the machine don't make the machine until they're brought together. The problem is we don't agree as to what parts are necessary to create that functioning machine. That's sort of where the problem is, and that's where the more dilemma is. And to go back to what I said at the beginning, I said that my cutoff point for abortion is 20 weeks. That's not necessarily when I believe personhood begins. But up to that point, I'm pretty confident in my position that personhood is not achieved up to that point. My position is that it actually might not even be achieved until as late as 30 weeks. But whatever the cutoff date for practical reasons, it's always going to be some sort of arbitrary date as far as I'm concerned. So that's just sort of where I place it. But I think to go, I want to present a question to you, Cody, because you present a lot of quite challenging questions to us. You say that essentially being human is what defines whether or not you have a right to life. And I would ask that therefore then if a dog had all the cognitive traits of a human being, does it therefore not have a right to life? Or if you came across alien life that had all the cognitive abilities of a human being, would they therefore not have a right to life? Would you have the right to kill them for whatever reason that you saw fit?
No, that's a good question here. Well, I mean, I wasn't done critiquing Garrett's view, but I was gonna. Oh well, I got whatever. I guess we can switch over to. You're not off the hook, Garrett. We're gonna finish this at some other. We're gonna finish at some other point here. So, yeah, my own view here. Okay, you asked if it turned out that aliens existed, like say, I would agree that if it turned out, say, Superman or somebody like that existed, they would be owed the same kind of respect as us, or if Vulcans existed or whatnot here. I would say my view is that being human is a sufficient but not a necessary condition for being a person. That would be my view, and I guess the main view that I hold to is what's called the substance view. It's defended by people like Francis Beckwith, Patrick Lee, and Christopher Kaczor, or Kazor. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. This view basically says that, well, okay, first of all, I would say that a person, right, is it'd be very similar to the definition that Boethius gave, which is somebody with a rational nature, moral reasoning, right? They're a substance with a rational nature, and they have this even if they can't immediately exercise this capacity, right? So, for example, to use one example here, right, a cat, right, like my cat Gordon, who is unfortunately not in the room right now, would be a feline substance, right? So he would have the capacity to purr, right? And he would have this capacity even before he developed the capacity, or even if something happened that infringed on this, he would still have this capacity for purring because of his nature. Same way with humans, right? I would have the capacity to think, we have the capacity to think rationally, even if, say, it's impaired by brain damage or development in this case, in the case of the fetus, they haven't developed yet to be able to exercise this capacity. So if I am the sort of being, right, with this rational nature that's valuable, I have this property as long as I exist as a substance here. And so the same would also apply to aliens, right? So if it turned out Vulcans existed, right, even though they're not biologically human, they would still have a rational nature, right, same as us, and thus they would be persons, the same as humans. So that's sort of, yeah, that's basically the substance.
I think the substance argument, or whatever it's called, I think you run into the same fundamental problem that the personhood argument, well, not the same, but similar, in the sense that who gets to decide how much substance or whatever the biological entity needs to have before it has the right to life. So I assume you arbitrarily, well, I assume you don't think it's arbitrary, but I assume you assume that it has substance at the point of conception, correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're either human or you're not. It's not a degreed property, right? I'm either human or I'm not a human. There's not, so it doesn't run into this problem of degreed properties or anything here. So.
So, how exactly? Go ahead, Garrett.
The problem with that way of looking at it is that flies in the face of evolution. It actually turns out that being human actually is precisely a degreed property. Species evolve gradually and there is no sort of hard and fast, clear cutoff between us and our sort of our ancestors. There's a number of sort of conventions, like for example, being able to interbreed. That's a conventional way of distinguishing species, but there's all sorts of potential problems for that. Things like donkeys and so forth that can have breeding issues, of course. So if I realize you're not a naturalist, but I presume that you don't want your position to fly in the face of a sort of scientific understanding of...
I don't think evolution refutes my position. So.
What's that?
I don't think evolution does. I don't think what your objection does refute my position here.
I don't think it refutes it. I think it complicates it.
Not necessarily, no. Because again, if we take the view that a person is someone with the rational nature, even if they don't exercise it, then it just follows that, right, because I'm a human, I have this nature from conception onward here. It doesn't, I just don't see how introducing evolution to the picture, or even accepting the view that humans have gradually evolved over the years, is somehow compromises this. So.
Well, it compromises it because you said either you're a human or you're not. And when you start looking at the evolutionary timescale, that's just not true. There are things which are nearly human but not quite human, and so...
Well, then just take human to mean humans, or at least the kind of human that I am, is someone with a rational nature. So if you don't have that,
But then Spock is a human too.
No, Spock was okay. Let me actually. I mean, bleh. Spock's not a human, but he's a person because he has a rational nature, right? So.
But then why does the humanity matter at all? Why not just say that it's about rational nature rather than human nature?
Well, I mean, just because humans essentially are rational animals, right? I mean, because of the kind of animal that I am, I'm a rational animal. The same with all humans, but at least the ones existing today.
No, actually, again, that's still not true. There's humans that have brain damage.
But
they're born congenital malformed brains that will never be rational at all.
But wait a minute, Garrett. Remember how I described the view here. I said you have this capacity even if you can't immediately exercise this capacity via brain damage or level of development or things like that. So
no, I'm talking about people who never have been able to exercise it and never will because they have a congenital malformation, something like a hydroencephaly, or excuse me, anencephaly, not hydroencephaly, anencephaly.
Oh, you're talking about you mean something like brain dead? Somebody who's brain dead, or
no? I don't think they're not quite brain dead. It basically, anencephaly basically means they have no upper brain, so they have a brain stem but no upper brain, and so they never have the capacity to reason, and they never will have the capacity to reason.
Okay, so you're asking, you're saying my position would entail that they have the right to life just the same as us?
Well, I'm curious. I don't know. I mean, I can see.
Well, because if that's what you think my position entails, there's really different ways to respond. There's ways to reply to that. One is you could say that they're not a unified substance here. That's a bit of a complicated response, but I'm more inclined personally, assuming I'm understanding correctly what the scenario you're talking about here of anencephalic infants. I'm more inclined to say that yeah, maybe they do. But not the right to life support, right? So just because I might have a right to life, right, doesn't mean that we are obligated to do anything and everything necessary to keep me alive, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I think that is a subtle and a nice response. Of course, it gives rise to the question of how one distinguishes the right to life to the right to life support, and where we draw the line and so forth. But I think that might be a question for another day.
Yeah, well,
I don't even think we can agree on, like, your argument is at what point we have the necessary steps to become human. But I don't even think there is any agreement on, I don't necessarily agree with the assumption that at conception someone has everything that is required to be human.
And why not?
Because for one, they cannot live without the mother. They still need many times more mass in order to be sufficient human. They still need to develop a brain, they still need to develop a heart. There's still so many functions that are not there yet. At what point do you say, okay, this has the necessary, who gets to decide at what point a fetus has the necessary substance to be human? I don't see how having the DNA is sufficient. I just don't see that as a drug. Because my skin cells have DNA. That doesn't mean anything.
You're right. Your skin cells do have DNA, and I know one objection. I know this Garrett is going to want to bring this up too. The idea of what about sperm and egg here, but the difference here between these skin cells, right, that I'm plucking off the back of my hand and I'm killing right now, these, right, are parts of are parts of a whole organism, right? Whereas a zygote is a whole distinct organism, right? So it's not.
Is it?
What?
Is it?
Yes, it is. It's not analogous to sperm, or it's not like sperm or skin cells, which are parts of another organism. A zygote is its own distinct organism, right? That already has the capacities to develop internally, which it'll later develop into, a fetus and then a child and an adult and everything. So
what say then you of monozygotic twins? Like, again, still in the zygotic phase, but
twinning
split.
objection. The twinning objection.
Yeah.
Well, explain the objection.
Well, the idea is that what differentiates a fertilized egg from a skin cell is the fertilized egg is its own organism.
Mm-hmm.
But then, say, time t1, it is a single a zygote, and then at time t2, a few minutes later, it is split into two, which will eventually grow up to become a pair of twins.
Right.
How is it one organism at time t1, but two organisms at time t2?
Well, there's a simple answer. Well, first off, before I reply to that, the twinning is only possible with a small number of embryos. So even if that objection worked, it would not justify abortion.
No, it's a conceptual issue.
You're right. That's what. Now to answer the conceptual issue here. First off, why think though that just because something can split into two means it wasn't a whole organism? For example, a flatworm, right? If I cut a flatworm in half, right, the flatworm will grow into two separate flatworms. But surely it's absurd to say that there was no whole flatworm prior to the split, right?
I agree it's absurd to say there's no whole flatworm prior to the split. What I'm not clear on is whether or not it makes sense to say that there's two separate organisms afterwards.
There's there's two separate organisms afterwards. You cut the flatworm in half. They're separate from each other, and then one flatworm grows the tail and goes on, and the same thing with the other one. It's like twinning, basically. You have two different flatworms.
I'm not sure they are different, though. I mean, what is it that differentiates them exactly?
Okay, how about this here? If we cloned me, right? If we were able to clone me, that clone would be a different organism from me, right?
Right, but we can point to things that differentiate you from the clone. You have different experiences than the clone. You have different memories. That's what distinguishes you.
Wait,
I'm not clear what distinguishes the flatworm from its other half.
Wait a minute, though. But so you're saying the clone would not be me until it developed consciousness? It is me until it develops consciousness?
Contrast a clone with the perfect copy, the Star Trek transporter problem, right?
Okay.
If you had a molecule-for-molecule copy, then I think it is hard to say that the copy isn't you. Again, as a naturalist, I realize you can have different. That's going to come out differently if you have different views on the nature of consciousness and so forth. But compared with the clone, there are natural empirical differences between you and the clone at any stage in its development. There is no point in which you and the clone are identical to each other physically. So you're clearly not the same organism on that grounds, if nothing else.
All right, so, okay, well, I guess if you want to take the duplicating example, well, for one thing, it's separate from me, right? I mean, right? Shouldn't the fact that it's separate means it's a different organism? I would think that alone just seems obvious enough to me, that it's a different organism, but I guess if it's not obvious enough to you, we can...
Well, I mean, you know how mushrooms work? The typical mushroom, it has, the blossom is above the ground, but under the ground there's very, very tiny microfilaments, like seriously incredibly small, that can travel for miles and miles and connect to another bloom. So you've got what looks to the untrained eye is two different organisms, two different mushrooms actually are connected to this very, very tiny microfilament. It's genetically the same organism. But it seems like you could cut that microfilament if you put a shovel in the dirt. You'd cut the microfilament, so it wouldn't be physically connected anymore. And it just seems to me that I think it's a mistake to think that there is some sort of metaphysical question about whether this is the same or a different organism. It seems like the answer to that question is going to depend entirely on our interests about what we mean, what we're trying to study when we look at it. And I think that's probably the same thing is true for the flatworm.
I guess. Well, then I guess we say when, like in the case of Oh, okay, like a zygote, like it's its own unified substance, right? But then when it splits here, right? I mean, again, barring the question of, well, does the zygote survive the split, or does it just barring that question here, when it splits, right? You have two different substances, right? Because you have each of the twins, right, has the same sort of rational nature that they'll both have the capacity to each grow individually to its own. Am I making sense here?
Well, it makes sense that they both will go on to develop these things, but it's what the problem I'm having is there doesn't seem to be anything that distinguishes them, again, other than the fact that they take up different pieces of space, which I will grant you. Other than that, there doesn't seem to be anything that distinguishes them from each other until, at a certain point in development, probably somewhere 24th week or so. But again, the space can't be it either, because there's various times when when a single embryo, a non-twinned embryo, is going to take up two different spaces as well, because it's going to pull apart and split. So it can't even be the space that makes the difference.
Well, could it be the fact that they're, given the substance view about what makes a person, could it just be the fact they're just two different persons, right? Because they have the different capacities. They're growing up to be different organisms here, so. I mean, wouldn't that alone seem,
Given the substance view, yes. But my problem is precisely that I don't think the substance view makes a whole lot of. I wouldn't say it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. This is the problem for the substance view, as to how the substance view can be correct, given what we know about how twinning works, because it challenges the idea that we can make sense of the idea of this is an organism. This organism has a substance. Because on the zygotic level, it's just a lot messier than that.
Or maybe I guess maybe my problem here is that I'm just not feeling. Maybe I'm just not feeling the full force of the objection. Maybe I don't know. It just doesn't feel like a big problem for me. I mean, again, because it just seems obvious that it's a different organism. I know that's not. Really
I understand how you feel about the argument, Cody, but that's exactly how I feel about the substance view. I just don't see what it is about being conceived that gives a fetus a right to life. There just doesn't seem, there's nothing there about the potentiality argument. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well,
because something has potential to be a human being with all of the traits, physical, cognitive, whatever, of a human being, that it therefore has a right to life that trumps whatever the wishes of the mother are.
Let's be clear here. The substance view isn't a potentiality argument. It's not saying that the zygote will become a person, right, with a rational nature. Rather, it already is a person with a rational nature. It just can't yet immediately exercise this function. And similar to how, again, if I'm in a coma, or if I'm under anesthesia, I cannot immediately exercise my capacity for rational thought. But nevertheless, I am still a rational being.
But it is a person because of what it can potentially do.
Well, because of what it is, and part of what it is, I guess, is what it can do, I suppose.
Well, I'm saying, if you had something, let's just say hypothetically speaking, you had something that was identical to an embryo at the point of conception, but it could never develop into a human being, that thing would not have the right to life, right?
Well, then how exactly would it be identical to an embryo? Because
except in that respect, instead of in respect to what it can become, it could have all the genetic. Well, let's say hypothetically speaking, for example, let's say scientists, for example, who were involved in embryonic research, let's say they had developed a way to change the genetic code of an embryo. Of an egg, or let's say you change the genetic code of an egg or a sperm cell, so that when they came together to form an embryo, they would never develop beyond the first 6 weeks, shall we say, of pregnancy. They would never go beyond that 6 weeks. They would automatically terminate. And this was due to genetic changes that were made prior to fertilization. So it could never ever actually become a human being.
Actually,
prior to fertilization. Oh, okay. Well, then if you just changed it, if you're saying prior to fertilization, like we altered the sperm and the egg so that they would form this whatever that would just die 6 months later. Well, I mean, No,
6 weeks later.
6 weeks later, sorry, 6 weeks later. Yeah, well then, no, that wouldn't be a person because it wouldn't really be a human substance at that point, then would it?
Well,
So
actually,
it really comes down to what a fetus can become in the end.
No, what it is.
So what it can become makes it what it is.
No, what it will be. No, I mean,
I just got to throw in here. There actually is a real condition that Rodell is talking about here. This is not fiction. It happens very rarely, but every so often, an unfertilized egg will start to divide as if it were a fertilized egg, and it will develop into what is indistinguishable from a zygote. Not completely indistinguishable, but it looks like a zygote, it acts like a zygote, and it does go on for a few weeks. It will even implant into the womb, and it can trigger a pregnancy test, but it never actually survives past a few weeks. So it does indeed appear to be like a zygote, with one exception. It does not have sort of the future. It does not have the capacity to grow into a full grown human being.
Okay, well,
it's a zygote.
Well, I would say that's not a person here, and because I heard there was a good analogy I heard from one of the guys at Life Training Institute. I think it was Rich Papard. I forget. Consider there was I can't remember the song, but he used the example of these two songs, right? I don't remember what the songs were, but I think we can go with this here. Both of these two songs have the exact same notes in the first 5 seconds of the song or something like that, right? But so within the first 5 or 10 seconds of the song, you cannot distinguish which song is the other song here, right? But yet, just because they have the same property at the beginning doesn't mean they're the same song, right? So it will be the same with the case of the zygote, the regular zygote, versus this other example that you were giving here.
Well, let me use your analogy then. So would you not agree that even if the last song let's say let's say you have two songs, and you keep everything the same but the very last note. So until that last note has been played, the song is not complete, correct? It's not really the full song.
Right.
So until a fetus reaches a certain point, how is it that a human being how is it that a fetus is a human being, even if it has not developed all of these other traits yet? But a song is not the full song until you play the very last note.
Well, because remember now, the song, right, is supposed to, because it has a natural course that it's supposed to reach in order for it to be considered ending, right? The same with a zygote, right? It would naturally is supposed to be able to grow old and everything, and thus, which is why when we kill it or when it dies at an early age, it's been cut off. It'd be more analogous to interrupting the song before it was over, as opposed to a full song with only one note difference at the end.
But the song does not have the properties of the song until it's complete, correct?
No, it always. I mean, until you finish listening to it. No, I mean it's got the properties even before you finished listening to it.
It has all the properties of a song before you start listening to it, in the same sense that a fetus has in the same sense that all the DNA of a human being exists even before the human is conceived. But that's not the same thing.
Well, no, the DNA does not exist.
I mean, let's say, but it's a bad analogy. I'm just trying to show. I don't think the analogy.
Well, it doesn't work in the way you want it to, but it works in my favor, I think, in regards to your objection. Can you continue? Sorry,
No, I just. So you're arguing. I just don't. What I'm saying is, I don't buy the difference between the substance argument and the potentiality argument. I don't buy the difference, because the only difference that you're making between potentiality is you're saying that, oh no, it doesn't have these properties yet, but it's still a human being. But you're saying that the fact that it has the right to life is because all these things that it not yet is essentially what you're arguing.
No, I'm saying that.
But it can become. No, that's exactly what you're saying. You're saying the substance view is that a fetus, an embryo is a person, because of all the things it can eventually come to do, right?
Come to do because of its properties that it has.
Right.
Yes.
That it properties it already has. What I'm saying is it is not fundamentally different from the potentiality argument, because you were talking about having a right to life because of properties that it does not yet have. Because it does have the potential to become these things. But I'm saying that the distinction between an embryo that has the potential to become this and an embryo that does not have the potential to become this, like an embryo that would terminate after 6 weeks, those things aren't fundamentally different. You're talking about what its future state will be. You're arguing based on its future state, not its current state.
Well, I guess we should distinguish here. A purely potentiality-based argument, the way you might be thinking of, would say that there's nothing about what the fetus currently has that we care about. It's what it will later become. That was what will make it valuable. Because that's where you get the whole people say a potential person. Like, we'll ask, do we have respect to potential persons here? Whereas the substance view would just say, well, no, it already has this property. Now, you're right, there is some potentiality involved in the sense that it cannot yet actualize its capacities, right? But it still has this capacity in virtue of what it is, even though it can't yet exercise this capacity here. So it's a little bit different from a purely potentiality sort of argument.
So you're saying, okay, so you're saying because of this argument, the fetus's rights are being violated in the same way that adult human beings. I just don't buy.
How about this? One of the ways people use to argue for this is to explain its explanatory power, because I happen to think this view best accounts for our intuitions in certain clear-cut cases. For example, one example that I've heard here. Imagine, right, that scientists were somehow able to alter an embryo, right, to where it's called the problem of creating brainless children. Let's say scientists could alter an embryo or fetus so that it would never acquire higher brain function. Like, what if we intentionally did this to a fetus, and then they would still grow, but they just would never have higher brain functions. And so we used these humans, we harvested their organs, and then for the women we used them as sex dolls or things like that. Now that, it seems to me, would seem to be wrong, right? But the only thing that seems to be able to explain this wrongness is the substance view, because the substance view would say that I know there are alternate ways people might try to explain this, but the substance view does explain why this is wrong, because they are the sorts of beings that are entitled to their higher brain functions, and you are depriving them of that because it's part of their natural capacities here, basically.
Well, I would say the women without it sounds dangerously similar to necrophilia, and that's probably the real reason. I mean, because the way the human brain works, but sometimes when you advocate, when you say things certain ways, you trigger certain emotions and senses of concept of sanctity that cause people to change their positions, but logically just doesn't hold out. Like, for example, I remember hearing that they asked people these questions regarding what they would do. It's like a trolley going, I think it's called. Where the trolley's coming down, would you push the person to slow down the trolley to prevent it from killing people, versus would you just pull the lever so the trolley would go in a different direction and run somebody over to slow it down and prevent those people from getting killed? And the number of people who would object to pushing the person over the cliff was greater than the number of people who objected to moving the lever so that it eventually leads to somebody being run over. The result was the same, but the reason why people gave different responses was because they were being asked would they physically remove somebody off the ledger, which it invoked a certain emotion. It made them closer to the problem itself. And I would say that's sort of similar to what you have here with the dead bodies, with the dead women's bodies. It sounds so close to necrophilia, as opposed to just reaping people's bodies, which I don't think is fundamentally all that different from embryonic stem cell research, and I therefore wouldn't be object to, because they never actually achieved personhood.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna bite the bullet on that, sure. I mean, consistency again, but Garrett, I know, wanted to say something here because he had his hand raised a while ago.
Yeah, no, I was going to say precisely the same thing that Riddell said, that we are back to the question about having sex with with corpses, and I would give the same answers. I think the virtue theoretic account can give a much better explanation of this than the substance view. But actually, I'm more interested in hearing what Lisa has to say. She's been listening patiently this whole time. She's had a couple of chat comments, but I haven't actually heard her voice tonight. So, what thinks you, Lisa? What are your ideas on this?
I was actually multitasking. Someone sent me a video, and I was studying it and then writing notes to them, and I was just about to send the email to them and then come right back into here. So I'm gonna send, and then I'm gonna come back. Okay, here we go. I'm back. I was actually I'm sort of half listening to what you guys were talking about. You were referencing basically a molar pregnancy, about the zygote that divides, and asking Cody if he considered that to be a person or not. And Cody, you had a response to that I didn't quite fully get when you made it, because you were trying to avoid kind of not supporting what you want to support, but still trying to make it make sense. How are you doing that?
For the example of the...
Well, for instance, we talked about molar pregnancies before, we talked about blighted ovums before, and whether or not they're persons just because, the substance of them are sperm and egg.
Well, no, the substance of them is not sperm and egg, but
Well, no, don't get past that, because you just said, well, the substance is not a sperm and egg. You are going to need to address that. You can't just go running past that. Well, tell me what the substance is.
Just make sure I understand. When the example you're giving, was it the example that Garrett was giving about the unfertilized egg that looks and acts like a zygote and then eventually just sort of dies or divides or whatever? Is that the example you were wanting my answer towards?
Well, no. There's a lot of substances that start out as egg and sperm that don't develop into a human being that's born and is able to be autonomous. So what I'm really asking you is what substances can be constituted as humans, because
you're asking what's the difference between the sperm and egg versus the zygote?
No. I'm asking you specifically because for instance, and you were talking about twins, because I had a twin pregnancy that I talked about before, the one where I was pregnant with Ethan, and then I had that second sac that was a blighted ovum that was empty. And you had indicated in the past that blighted ovum was indeed a person, and I've had other pro-life people indicate to me that in fact that was a person and is now in heaven. But I'm curious, what made that blighted ovum a person? Because it clearly was unsustainable. So what made it a person on the same level as my son who was later born?
Okay, assuming that the blighted ovum is an actual zygote that just dies or whatever. Well, it's because it's a human, right? And humans are essentially, according to the substance view, rational animals, even though they can't immediately exercise this capacity. So, and basically that in a nutshell is kind of what makes a zygote a person, even though it can't yet exercise its capacity to think rationally or engage in moral reasoning or any of that stuff.
Okay, so then you do think that my blighted ovum was a person, and you're saying it's because it was a zygote?
Because it's a human with a rational nature.
Because it's a what?
A human with a rational nature.
How do you justify that a blighted ovum would have... How would you be able to test that a blighted ovum would have a rational nature? How would you be able to decipher its rational nature?
Because
it escaped from my body at 6 weeks. how would you be able to decipher that it was rational at that time that it exited my body?
Well, remember now, it might not have been able, it can't immediately exercise its capacity to be rational, but it still has the capacity nonetheless. And again, that's why
No, it didn't have the capacity.
No,
The fact that it spontaneously left my body at 6 weeks negates that capacity. How do you assign rationality to my blighted ovum?
Well, sure. Well, I mean, once the organism dies, sure, it no longer has that capacity because.
But you said that my blighted ovum was a person because it was rational, even though the sac was empty. Like, I mean, when she did the ultrasound, you could see inside of the sac where my son was. You could see what looked like a grain of rice. Inside of the other, there was nothing. So let's assume, let's say that what a blighted ovum is, I don't know, but let's say that what a blighted ovum is some kind of a membrane that's filled with saline, like a blister.
Okay, well, if that's...
Is that a person because it exists inside the uterus?
Well, no. If that is what a blighted ovum is, then no, it's not a person because it's not a whole human... I mean, if it really
no,
is
I would now see. Now I'm agreeing. I agree with you.
That's why, yeah, because I wasn't entirely.
That makes perfect rational sense to me. That this object that never developed. I mean, if my son was this size at 6 weeks gestation and looked like a little bit of rice, and the other was half the size, we're talking 6 weeks here. This probably stopped at about maybe implantation. Maybe it lasted a day after implantation and just didn't quite eject yet. So we're talking about something that's just sort of there until it gets flushed out or absorbed.
Wait, just to be clear, is a blighted ovum the same as a what we call a hydidiform mole? If I'm pronouncing, is that the same thing or is that something else?
No, I think. Did you say molar?
A hydidiform mole. I think that'd be a molar pregnancy. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, I think that's different. I think a molar pregnancy is one where it continues to divide, but it's basically a cancer.
Okay.
And not.
Yeah, because that is not, because it's not a whole human. That's not a person. So just trying to.
Okay.
Just trying to make sure.
And a blighted ovum is basically an egg that got fertilized, but nothing ever divided inside of it.
So it's an incomplete fertilization, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Well, in that case, then, if it's an incomplete fertilization, what came was not a full-fledged human, so thus it's not a person. Then.
I appreciate your honesty in that.
Yeah.
I really do.
But I mean, I don't think it doesn't compromise my position or anything, though. So I mean, that's why.
Well, no, I don't think it. I don't think it does either. I honestly think that holding to a blighted ovum being a person doesn't do anything but weaken your position, because I think if you, and you're not holding to that anymore, but people have. I think that by holding to that position, I think that you undermine what you think a person is. You devalue what you think a person is, and I think that can do nothing but undercut your position if you are pro-life. So I think that part of the responsibility, if you're going to take a pro-life position, is to be to recognize that there are things that happen in the uterus, like that typically result in miscarriage, or in the case of a molar pregnancy that would be removed, that you would have to, as if you wanted to be consistent, that you would have to eliminate those things as persons. But in order to do that, I think the difficulty in taking that position for someone who's pro-life is that the other position tends to be that life begins at conception. So if life begins at conception, but then there's a myriad of things that can happen after conception, not all of which result in a viable pregnancy, then you have to take into consideration all the different things that could happen in a uterus that are not viable, and that starts to make your position a little shaky. I don't know that it has to. I think that you can probably stay consistent if you look at viability and still be pro-life. I think you can probably be even more consistently pro-life if you consider viability. But I think you get on really shaky ground if you start saying that things that are not viable and will not ever have the capacity have the same merit, or that's not the right word, but it can be treated equally as something that will, if uninterfered with, be born at some point.
Yeah, just interestingly, Robert George and Christopher Tolfson, actually, in their book Embryo: A Defense of Human Life, actually, the reason I was asking about the biological questions is because I'm just trying to make sure, like, you know, what the things we're talking about, because they actually talk a lot about like molar pregnancies and whether or not these are actual embryos that are deserving of rights and everything. So yeah, that's why I was asking. But no, I don't think viability. No, I don't accept viability as a good criterion here. But the reason I was asking about the different, you know, what a hydroform mole is or a blooded ovum is because, you know, when we say life begins in conception, because what typically is produced at conception is what is usually produced at conception, namely a zygote or embryo, whatever you want to call it, is what we're saying. It's what it is about this embryo that has this nature that makes it. Oh, Garrett, you wanted to say something?
Finish your thought, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. What is my thought? Yeah, I guess that's about it. I probably said that really sloppy, but jump in, Garrett. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering, what about on those admittedly very rare occasions where the thing that is created at conception isn't something that goes on to become some the sort of the rational thing? So again, you said in the case of the molar pregnancy, that's not actually a person with a substance.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't know all the details here, but my understanding is that any zygote might actually end up becoming a molar pregnancy. We can't know at the stage of the zygote whether it will become that. So if it's not, if you want to say that, okay, this zygote right here at time t1 is a person, or is it, you know, has moral status as a human, whatever you want to call it, but then at time t2 it becomes a molar pregnancy. When does it stop becoming a person somewhere?
Okay. Well, because in the case of the molar pregnancy, right, the reason that it does that, I assume, is it's because of something that the zygote already has that's going to make it, you know, become that molar pregnancy. Is that correct, biologically speaking?
I don't know. The biology.
Because I'm pretty sure, from what I understand, I'm pretty sure that's the case, because there's something about the zygote. It has something that's going to make it do that, but yet it's just, you can't really, it's difficult to detect that, or near impossible, I suppose. Given that means there's something wrong with the way it is, so it's meaning it's not a whole human being in the sense that I'm referring to here, and thus it was not a person to begin with at that point.
So it seems like, yeah, there's two possibilities here, and no one here knows enough about the biology to distinguish them. But if you are right, if the biology works that way, if there's something wrong with the zygote from the moment of conception, then I think you're in the clear. But if alternatively the zygote is indistinguishable, and so it's something that happens later that transforms its development, then that might be a real problem for you.
No, if that were the case, I don't see how that would be a problem, because, I mean, all that would mean is that, yes, it was a person, and then something happened, and then it just died. I mean, it really wouldn't be any different from a miscarriage at that point. So I don't see how that's problematic.
But everything about it biologically is continuous. It's not dead. It's still alive. It's.
But it's not a unified. Assuming I understand we're talking about molar pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Describe to me. It starts dividing, basically. Okay, because it's what happens then at that point is that it's no longer a unified substance, right? Because the parts have stopped working for the good of the whole, right? So that's what, because hence the whole spreading out and everything. So.
Actually, no, I think it's quite the other way around. It's that it doesn't differentiate. So again, I could be mistaken here because I don't know. I can't speak authoritatively on the biology.
We're gonna have to look this up. We're gonna have to look this up.
Can I just take a different track here? Because I don't think any of us know exactly whether or not there's something different about a zygote that would make it turn into a male pregnancy or not. What exactly is it, Cody, about a fertilized egg that makes it a person that doesn't make an unfertilized egg a person?
That doesn't make an unfertilized egg a person. Okay. Well, first of all, in case of an unfertilized egg or sperm, they're parts of another organism. The same as my skin cells right here. I believe I said this before here. They're parts. They're not whole human organisms the way that a zygote is. Okay.
Hear me?
I was typing, but I'm just going to say it. I think the point that Garrett's trying to make, that I agree with, is that if you have a spontaneous abortion or you have a pregnancy that's going to need to be terminated because it's cancerous, then you have a pregnancy that was inherently, that what's inside of the uterus was inherently never of that substance that you would term a unified human being. What it sounds like you're trying to say is that at the point of conception, it's always a unified human being.
No,
and
I didn't
then
say
something
that.
goes wrong. But I think what Garrett's trying to say, and what I agree with, is that that is not always the case, and you cannot make that distinction. And I would say that if you do end up with a spontaneous abortion, it's because that never was to be.
Well, because something...
And obviously it never was to be because it spontaneously aborts.
Well,
I don't know why it gets sympathy as a unified human being when it has no potential, because clearly it ends.
Well, that's certainly in the case.
Well, Lisa, I guess is saying is that you don't know whether or not a embryo upon conception necessarily will develop into a full human being. You don't know at that point. That's the point, I guess, is trying to be made.
Whether or not it is a full human being is what I'm trying to say here. That's why I end up asking a lot of questions about the biology of this. But because I'm probably about half an hour or 45 minutes or whatever, I'm going to want to go to bed. I do want to jump to one other thing I wanted to talk about, especially now that Garrett is here, because I only got mentioned this last time we talked.
I just want to say, because I had paused with my computer, so I couldn't follow up, and I was going to ask, why is an embryo why is a fertilized egg a distinct being and an unfertilized egg isn't a distinct being?
Oh, you didn't hear my answer? Basically, well, because it's part of another organism, right? So it's not like the skin cells are not a unified whole, because they are part of me. They're part of this organism that I am here, right?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I don't buy the premise that the embryo is necessarily not a part of another organism. I mean, that's not my point. My point is, it doesn't matter whether or not it's a distinct being. What I'm saying is, how is it the fact that it's a distinct being make it human? Well, it being distinct from the mother doesn't necessarily make it human.
Well, wait a minute. What do we mean by human here? Because certainly in the biological sense, it's definitely human if we mean member of the species Homo sapien, right? I assume we all agree on this. This part's pretty uncontroversial. We know
in the biological sense, it's human. What do you mean in the biological sense?
Well, like it's
a person who's brain dead is biologically human.
Yeah, that's why I was saying here. It's a whole human here, right? Now, then we ask here, what is it about? Does this matter? Is this relevant here? Well, what
I'm trying to say is, how is being human? I don't think being human is necessarily sufficient for having a right to life.
Okay, well,
like a brain dead person is human, but that doesn't mean he has a right to life.
But remember, I gave a little answer to the brain dead thing here, right? And I assume we say brain dead. You really mean somebody who's still alive, like their heart is beating and all that, but like their higher brain functions are just not
gone. Yes.
Okay. Well, one answer, which is a little more nuanced here. I know Patrick Lee has mentioned how he says that in that case it's not a unified substance, but I haven't really fully read his reply. I need to look at that. I find it more plausible to say that, yeah, they do have a right, but not the right to life support. So just because I might have a right to life doesn't mean I have the right to be kept alive with any and all means necessary, right? So.
Well, so you're saying that the difference between someone who is brain dead, they don't have the right to be sustained indefinitely.
Well, nobody has the right necessarily to be sustained indefinitely.
Right. But particularly that's the reason why they don't essentially have the right to be. So you're saying it's not an issue of whether or not they have a right to life. It's an issue of whether or not they have the right to be sustained indefinitely. So why does an embryo have a right to be sustained indefinitely?
Because in the case of the brain dead person, it's a defect that this person has, right? But in the embryo, there's nothing in the case there's nothing wrong with the embryo, right? The embryo will naturally develop and grow and change and everything, just like a healthy human is supposed to do. So
it's the fact that it potentially has the capacity to develop into that full human being, that it therefore has a right to be sustained by the mother.
Yeah, something like that. Well, in the sense that because it's
go ahead.
Because it's a person with these that has a right. It has a right to its, to have a life and to be able to have higher brain functions and everything. That's why we don't kill it here. I mean, unless somebody's, of course, going to just grant all that and make a bodily autonomy argument like Judith Jarvis Thompson, which I know Garrett makes those kinds of arguments, but that's not really relevant to the substance view. So, but I mean, just because it's getting late over my time, I am enjoying. Oh, yeah, I would like to before Garrett has to go, I would like to talk a little bit about the future like ours argument, Don Marquis's future like ours, because we didn't, last time I talked with Garrett, didn't really get much of a chance to touch on this a little bit though. So I'd sort of like to, I'd like to go a little bit in depth with Garrett. I mean, I guess if Lisa and Rodell would like to hear us explain the future like ours. I'll explain the future like ours argument.
How is it different? I thought it was the same. That's synonymous.
No. This is a different argument from the substance.
No, I didn't think it was. I thought it was the same as the potentiality argument. That's what I thought.
No. This is this is a different argument. This doesn't use the substance view.
They all get kind of hazy.
Basically, the future like ours argument comes from an article by Don Marquis. He wrote in 1989, Why Abortion is Immoral. And basically, he says he just starts by asking the question, what makes killing wrong? And he reasoned that one thing that makes killing wrong is that it deprives the individual of their future, of experiences and so forth. And since because we have what he calls a future like ours, that's one thing that makes killing wrong. And because a fetus also has the typical fetus, at least the normal fetus, has a future like ours, it would be wrong to deprive the fetus of a future like ours. The same way it would be wrong to kill an adult human being. That's the argument in a nutshell, right there. And so, I was kind of wanting to go I was kind of wanting to talk about that a little bit with Garrett, because I know Garrett has objections to it. So, and I assume the rest of you all do as well. So.
Yeah, I do think that Marquis's argument is the best sort of secular pro-life account out there. And I mean, my one problem I have with it is I honestly just covered abortion in my my intro to ethics classes, and the problem I hit them with, again, I made a video on this, it's the burning fertilization clinic thought experiment, where it seems like if Marquis's idea is correct, then if we can choose between saving 5 million fertilized eggs that we all have adoptive parents waiting for them, will grow up into becoming so they have a future like ours, or one 5-year-old child, then we should save the eggs, because that's 5 million beings that have a future like ours, rather than one. And it seems like, all other things being equal, you should save as many futures of value as possible. But no one is willing, a very small number of people are willing to actually bite that bullet and accept that.
Yeah, but I think it's actually not so hard to bite when you add, like at least for me, like what you did, where you said how that we know in this case that the embryos are going to be they're going to be adopted, they're going to grow up and everything. They're not just going to die a day or two after they're rescued and everything. I mean, in that case, it doesn't seem like much of any kind of bullet to bite to say, well, yeah, it is perfectly acceptable to save the 5 million embryos. So.
Well, it's one thing to say it's acceptable, I think, but I think it's probably going to have to go further than that. You're going to have to say it's obligatory, because presumably if we're talking about saving 5 million 5-year-olds versus 1 5-year-old, someone who saves the 1 5-year-old is going to have a lot of explaining to do. But if you are willing to bite that bullet, then obviously this argument has no traction with you. And you know, more power to you. Again, consistency, credit. But for what it's worth, I think you should know that you are going to be, in my experience, in the incredible minority. I mean, I ask my students this every semester, and I think, you know, so at this point I've asked probably more than 300 students in 3 different states, and I think maybe 2 or 3 of them have actually bitten the bullet on it. So.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it reminds me of an argument that I should have made a long time ago. And that is, well, first of all, I guess I have to ask the obligatory question first. Cody, do you believe that abortion is essentially murder?
Yes.
So the punishment for abortion should be whatever you think the punishment for murder should be?
Something like that. I mean, you'd have to take into account things like motive and intent and whatnot. I guess I can see where you're going with this. I say the best way to look at how to do that legally, because I know prior to Roe v. Wade, it was usually because the doctors are the ones that actually that perform the abortion. They're usually the ones that took the most for the punishment from the law, and the law tended to be a little bit more lenient on the women. But certainly, you know, if you know, either one of the arguments are right, the substance view, they really are persons, or Marcus's future like ours, certainly there should be some sort of consequence for this.
So I think, okay, I see you're consistent on that. I'm sorry. I just want to say one thing. I see you're consistent on that. I'll grant you that. I think that your view is, I don't think a lot of, I think it's like what Garrett said about the analogy he made. I don't think a lot of people actually subscribe to that view that a fetus is really a person. So I think a lot of people don't really believe that, even if they make this substance argument. But at least you're consistent. I agree with that.
Well, my only thing to that was, and yeah, I mean, you're consistent. I kind of wonder, based on thinking that, you know, it's murder because it's inherently a human being because of the substance. Do you then, what do you think about some of the proposed laws about prosecuting a woman that's had a miscarriage? Well, and because there have been some laws proposed.
Well,
that,
I'm sorry, continue.
You know, because people think, well, you know, sort of what James was saying earlier, that there's any number of reasons why you might spontaneously abort. Maybe you didn't get enough sleep. Maybe you drank early before you knew that you were pregnant. And so, I mean, do you agree with going after women that have had miscarriages to see whether or not they did anything that might have caused it?
No, I don't think that's right to punish someone who has a miscarriage, because like I said, unlike James, I do think there is a very big distinction between your body causing a miscarriage, which in this case kills a human being, versus intentionally causing the death of another human being. So I think there's a big distinction with that. So I do not think it would be right to throw a woman in jail just because she had a miscarriage here. So.
Why? I'm curious, because you use this very strong language when you talk about miscarriage. You've said this time and time again, that when a woman has a miscarriage, that miscarriage is killing the baby. Why? I mean, maybe it's just because you're trying to be consistent, but that seems like a really strange way to characterize something that just happens spontaneously, that it's an act of killing, especially when the thing that's miscarrying was potentially never anything of, as you were saying before, a united human substance, because you said molar, not a united human substance, blighted, not a united human substance. So where do you, I almost want to say, where do you get off saying that it's that a miscarriage is killing something that potentially wasn't even, in your definition, a unified human being.
Where are we talking about the molar pregnancy? Or are we talking about a regular sort of a regular zygote?
Any miscarriage whatsoever, because you can't really break down. All you know is that it miscarried. It did not have the potential to become.
Lisa, are you trying to say that when you talk about the legal concept, are you trying to say that it's not at all clear whether a woman actually had a miscarriage, or maybe she deliberately tried to terminate the pregnancy through alcoholism or something like that, or that maybe she did something unknowingly that resulted in the death of the fetus? But it's not clear. Like, for instance, let's just say, for example, hypothetically, someone's eating unhealthily and it results in the death of the fetus. Is that murder? Because for a child, that would be neglect, would it not? If a child was conceived and the person did something that resulted in the death of that child because of negligent behavior on their part, they would be prosecuted for at least negligent homicide or manslaughter. I don't know, but they would be prosecuted for something. And I think what she's trying to say is, if a woman does something that leads to the death of the fetus, if it's considered murder to kill a fetus, then can you prosecute a woman for neglect, for behaving in a way that leads to the death of that fetus? And that would also leave up a whole bunch of legal problems. We have all these women who didn't do anything, and of course it becomes this question of what qualifies as neglect in the first place. Go ahead.
Well, is an interesting legal.
No, exactly, and that's why I'm challenging you on characterizing all miscarriage as killing.
Well, here's the thing, Lisa.
For the reasons that SmartMouth says, but also taking into consideration what you said previously, that there are substances that occur later on in the uterus, and I know that your position is at conception always a unified human being, and then something goes wrong. I'll grant you that just for the sake of argument, but at that point where it goes wrong and it's no longer a unified human, I don't understand.
Well, here's the thing,
this language of killing and why it doesn't lead to some of the problems that SmartMouth so really well articulated so very well.
Well, legally,
not articulated well.
Getting to the legal problem, the thing about a lot of these miscarriages you talk about is a lot of times they happen without the woman realizing it. I mean, I'm thinking of the kind of miscarriages like.
That's the point. We don't necessarily know if they happen without the woman realizing it.
There's no way we can know, right, that this woman at this moment, right now, is having a miscarriage here. And but the thing is, though, like, that doesn't necessarily mean we're up, because we have no real way to effectively figure that out here. And so it's just, I don't know, I mean.
So the problem is, how do you know the woman actually committed murder?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, how would the woman even be prosecuted anyway? Because I mean, you have no reason to suspect a woman's having you have no reason to suspect the woman's having a miscarriage. And plus, it gets back to, it's not like the woman is intentionally causing a miscarriage in these cases anyway. So. Well,
that's the point. Even you're saying that a fetus is a person. That's what I'm saying. You're saying that a fetus is a person, right? And what I am saying, and what I think Lisa is trying to say is, if a fetus is a person, then you can be negligent towards that fetus, just as you could be negligent towards a child, right?
Here's the thing. Am I obligated? We're not generally concerned with things that are maybe out of mind, out of sight. For example, we don't really think or concerned. I mean, we wouldn't say that I'm a monster because I'm not right now going out to Africa or whatever to save some people from dying or whatever, though, because it's just like, I mean, it's very inconvenient. It's sort of off my radar here, and it's kind of the same. I guess you can kind of say it's similar to miscarriage here. I mean, miscarriages again. I mean, we have no effective way to figure out whether or not there's a miscarriage going on, and we have no good way of even doing this. I mean, now if we did have a way, right, to maybe stop miscarriages or figure out if someone was right now having a miscarriage at this point, then we would be obligated to do something about these miscarriages that happen. But in the meantime, we just, I guess you could say it's kind of up in the air here.
I don't think you're quite seeing my point. Let me think. How can I articulate this? Okay, let's say, hypothetically speaking, a woman is doing X. It doesn't matter what X is,
Okay.
but she's doing X. And that X has a reasonable chance, if she does it, or if she does it repeatedly, to result in the termination of the fetus. She knows it can do this. She knows it can do that, but she's not necessarily doing it with the intent of killing the fetus. Like, for example, she's consuming alcohol, or she's consuming some sort of substance that might result in fetus death, or she's performing some sort of activity that might put the fetus at risk, like some sort of sport or something. What I'm trying to ask, and what I think what Lisa is trying to ask is, can you not prosecute her for neglect if she behaves in a way that results in the death of the fetus? Isn't that essentially negligent homicide or something equivalent, like manslaughter?
That's definitely an interesting question. I guess, again, it would come down to motive and intent, the same way we do other things.
But negligence isn't about intent.
Yep. I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting legal question to ask.
It's not just a legal question.
Give me a little more time to chew on. Give me a little more time to chew.
I understand. I understand. If you never heard it, I don't expect you to really have it.
I've thought a little bit about this here, but I mean, just give me a little more time to chew on this.
No, I understand perfectly.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just not entirely convinced it has my view leads to these kind of disastrous consequences or whatever that you guys seem to think that it does. But anyway, I mean, this is interesting. But I would like to get back before Garrett has to go to the future like ours argument. Garrett, do you have any other objections to the future like ours argument, or is what you just gave me really it?
Yeah, I mean, burning fertilization clinic is one. I mean, I think that it's and one thing he specifically does address in the article, but I don't think he addresses adequately, is the concern that it's going to have similar implications for contraception or just from abstinence, because you're withholding futures like ours. He tries to dodge that by saying that there is no entity, there's no being that has the future in those cases. But I don't think he can. Again, I think that he's relying on a metaphysics there, which is just too tenuous. The idea that the second you have conception, magically you have a being, when just prior to conception you don't. I think that when you actually look at the biology, it's just so much messier than that. So I don't think he can draw that hard and fast line. So I do think that the future like ours argument will either entail that sperm and eggs have a future like ours too, even before conception, or it will entail that a fertilized egg does not have a future like ours until some later point in the pregnancy, well past the zygote phase. Precisely when, hard to say. So there's a cluster of things there.
Yeah. As I recall, I mean, hasn't Marquis in some places though? I don't think Marquis necessarily thinks that conception, because hasn't he stated? Maybe I'm wrong here, but hasn't he stated some places where he thinks it maybe could be a little bit after conception or something, or am I just?
I vaguely recall him saying something like that in a debate. I can't remember the specifics though.
Yeah, because I seem to recall, because I don't recall reading this in any article of his. I've only read 2 of his articles, but I just seem to recall somebody citing something like that. But yeah, I guess the way you might get out of the conception thing, I mean, I guess it does depend on a sort of biological account of identity here. I mean, I just don't see reason to think that sperm and egg is analogous. I mean, not analogous. Is identical in the relevant way to an embryo or a fetus here. I suppose maybe one could invoke the constitutive property argument, but that's kind of a separate argument at that point. Like thinking here. Well, okay, so like I mean, I don't know, does it make sense to say, I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense to say that I'm identical, right, to a sperm or egg, but doesn't it make sense to say that I'm identical to a zygote? Like, I mean, or not?
I mean, yeah, I have heard a number of people make this argument, including Marquis, and I don't think it makes sense to say that you are that you once were a fetus. That really? I don't think that makes sense at all. I think the things that make you are things that came in well after you developed as a fetus. I mean, you know, it's your personality, it's your memories, your character. You know, again, it's a cluster of stuff. There's no sort of hard and fast way of drawing what it is that makes you you. But merely being a biological entity or having this particular DNA strain is not what makes you in any relevant sense.
That's why I don't buy the potentiality or the substance or the futures ours argument. Yeah, I just read it before I had came in here, and they all have the same problem in the sense that you're saying that a fetus, a zygote is a human being because of what it can be or what it will become in the future, not based on what it is right now. I think that people have rights because of what they are, not what they will become, not what they have the potential to become. Not, you know, that's just my position, and that's why in response to that argument, I would go back to personhood. I think people are what they are based on their experience. I think people are human based on their experiences, not based on their biology. Basically. And if a human being was transferred to a dog, it would still be human in any way as far as how I would treat them. It would, and the same thing would apply for a sentient alien. That's my position anyway.
One thing that's always worth noting, though, is that Marquis's position is not a potential personhood argument.
Yeah.
He's not saying that they are potential people, therefore they have rights.
I'm not saying that they are people. I understand that.
No, he's not saying they are people.
Yeah.
He actually wants to sort of completely subvert the personhood account at all. He says there's only one thing that matters. It's whether or not they have a future of value. Now, if you want to equate that with personhood, I don't think you have a problem with it. But I think he wants to say that that's a different strategy. And so his thinking is that they have a future regardless of whether they are a fetus or a young child or an adult.
But then you kind of have a weakness compared to the substance argument, because now you're saying that now how do you distinguish? You have a harder time distinguishing a fertilized egg from an unfertilized egg. It seems like that argument has even more problems as far as saying this thing, once it's fertilized, it has a right to life. But before then, it seems like it has even bigger problems than the subs argument. And the subs argument is kind of like we agree to disagree. With the potential argument, like you can say the exact same thing about a sperm cell. You can say the exact same thing. I mean, you could say like, if I don't have sex with this person today, that person will never exist. You can go all the way back there.
And that's precisely so many absurd obligations earlier. Yeah, those are exactly the kinds of criticisms I was bringing up like 10 minutes ago. So.
Well, I guess I will grant, though, that the conception objection definitely does seem more difficult to meet on Marquis's future like ours. I'm still turning the argument over my head a bunch here, because I only recently heard about this argument a few months ago. But I mean, I think the substance easily gets out of the conception thing. But yeah, it does seem a little bit more difficult to me to say the future like ours argument avoids this. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out. Well, I guess I'm not entirely convinced, but maybe I'll just have to think more about that. But
I think the substance argument is better in that I don't agree with that embryo is a person, but it seems like it's hard to really refute it as easily. I mean, I don't agree, but I can't. It's harder to parse that.
I mean, the thing about the future, like the thing I find appealing about, I mean, the future like ours argument. I mean. It just seems to have this appeal where just this idea that this account of killing, the fact that it deprives people of their futures. I mean, I think it certainly does seem very intuitive here, and I think that sort of is a bit, at least seems to me at least, to be kind of an appeal of this argument, the way how it taps into this idea that if I kill, when we kill somebody, people will say things like, oh, that person has so much to live for, or, it just. Seems right to say that he was robbed of something that he was never able to experience, and I guess that certainly seems to be what a lot of people find appealing about this. But I don't know. I mean, but like I guess I want to ask this here, like, well, so but Garrett, like, do you like think that the idea. The future, the depriving of the future. I mean, how do you take that as a general ethic? Like, do you think that's at least a sufficient reason why maybe an adult, it's wrong to kill an adult human being or something?
I think it's tapping into something that's important, but I don't think that the best way to sort of parse that importance is in terms of a future like ours. I think the value of that way of thinking can be better explained in terms of other things. Exactly what, it's hard to say for sure, because any particular proposal, of course, will have its own problems, and there could be a large debate about any particular proposal. But yeah, it seems to me that obviously one thing that is important in dealing with people is considering how your actions affect their future and their future well-being. But to put things in terms of a future like ours, again, I think opens up a metaphysical conundrum. Again, the same thing that Riddell was talking about, and I was talking about, about what does it mean to have a future, to possess a future.
It sounds like a great argument for somebody who has already been born, but it just doesn't seem to hold once you go all the way back into the fetus. It sounds great intuitively when you're dealing with someone who's already born. Because everybody agrees that a person who's been born is has a future. We don't necessarily agree, has a right to a future. Rather, we don't necessarily agree on. So it seems like it only works if you already assume that a fetus is a person.
One thing I find interesting is David Boone, in his book A Defense of Abortion, his sort of criterion for a right to life is actually based somewhat on Don Marquis's Future Like Ours. He calls it like a sort of a modified Future Like Ours argument, where like he sort of says, yeah, what makes that's a good reason for why killing is wrong, but you only have a sort of a future like ours if it's only valuable if you desire that future, and that's when he develops his desire-based account, and then he says that when he grounds that organized cortical brain activity. So his account is sort of a modified future like ours, he calls it. So he says, yeah, fetus has a future like ours, but it doesn't matter because he doesn't desire this future. He doesn't really have the ability to desire it until he reaches organized cortical brain activity. So I find that interesting, how it's sort of strategy. I know, Garrett, did you ever read that? Have you ever read this book, by the way?
Not the book. I have read an essay. I presume it's from that book, or it's been incorporated into that book somewhere. I think I saw a debate actually between him and Marquis at one point.
Oh, really? David Boone debated Don Marquis?
I could be confusing who it was, but I want to say it was David Boone, yeah.
Was it, was it, because the only video debate I've seen of David Boone was his debate he had with, what is that guy's name? It was the guy who wrote the Unaborted Son, Peter Kreeft, that's it, the Peter Kreeft debate. Yeah, that's the only video debate I've seen of David Boone, and in that debate he pretty much just, David Boone just stuck entirely to the Good Samaritan, the violinist argument, the whole debate. So.
Yeah, I could be mistaken about who I'm remembering. It's obviously a lot of this stuff starts to blur together. I'm actually quite impressed that you're able to keep it so organized, Cody. But it is like 11 o'clock here where I am now, and I do have to be getting some more work done before I can turn into bed. So I do have to say goodnight.
Cody, I just want to ask you one question before you go. I know you don't have an answer now, but back to what Lisa and I had said, I just want to divorce the legal issue from it real quick, because I don't believe in legal arguments. I don't think the law really matters in branching things becomes a moral argument. I wanted to add, I think it should inform legal law, but I don't think legal arguments would hold much water. What I was trying to get at was that would you, if somebody did something, you personally, it doesn't matter if you knew her, but if a woman did something that put the life of the fetus at risk, and she knew it put the life of the fetus at risk, but she wasn't necessarily intending to kill it, but it resulted in its death, considering the fact that you think that the fetus is alive, wouldn't that at the very least qualify as like negligent homicide or involuntary manslaughter? I know you don't have an answer now, but
well, I would like to. There's certainly cases where like that a lot of us do agree would involve, like for example, when a woman drinks alcohol while pregnant, right? Gets we all seem to agree that something like that is definitely negligence. So I suppose something like that could maybe take precedence in something like this. So, but Yeah, it's midnight. It's midnight where I am, so I believe I must go now. So, but I have very much enjoyed this conversation. So,
Okay.
all
And
right.
I just want to admit real quick, it's a problem for me in my position a little bit as well, even though I don't necessarily think it's feasible.
Well, you think it like? Well,
I don't think it begins at
you think it's like
conception, but I do think
like
it's
30 weeks or something?
yeah, after 20 weeks. I'm having a problem with my computer right now. I'm not even sure if you can still hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's a problem for me as well. I haven't really even given it much thought until we have brought it up. But crap. I gotta go. My computer's
That's
messed up.
okay. Well, yeah. Take care, man.